according to Eastern African time. So we will be starting our session as more people are joining in. So we would like to welcome you to BIC Africa Online Training 2023, and specifically to this first session on Introduction to Incubation and Ecosystems. So my name is Christina Dags. I'm the project manager of the BIC Africa project. I'm here also with my colleague David Dagne, who is the communication officer within the project, and Robert Sanders, the team leader, will be joining us a little bit later, and our two experts, Douglas Thompson and Francisco Rocha, who will be leading this session. So Douglas, if you could please switch to the next slide. So to start with the objectives of this virtual training session, of which this session is a part of. So this course is designed to provide incubators really an opportunity to connect with incubation and innovative entrepreneurship experts, and also among themselves. The idea is to learn about proven models and strategies of setting up and running business incubators, and also how to engage with investors. So we will have 4 sessions in total, as you can see on the screen. So today is the first session, and this is really a sort of an introduction to incubation and ecosystems. Our next session will be focusing on business model canvas and will take place on the 4th of December. The third session and the fourth session will then really focus on the topic of engaging with investors, and these 2 sessions will take place on the 6th December and the 13th of December. But the whole virtual training center as such will also continue during the next years. So this is really our first 2023 edition that we are holding now in November and December. Douglas, could you switch to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I said, we have 4 sessions. So all of these sessions will take place from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern African time. They are all 4 hours long, and on the right side you can see our expert trainers. So today here with us, as I said before, we have Douglas and Francisco from SPI, but in the future sessions we will also have Susanna Seabra from SPI and Francesca Natali and Lorenzo Valeriani from Meta Group. Thank you. Next slide, please. So to get to the agenda of today, so first of all, we will introduce the BIC Africa project for those of you who are not really familiar yet, to explain what are really the aims of this project. Then as the next session from 2:15, we will be setting the scene and challenges for business incubation. So this will already be led by Douglas and Francisco. So here the idea is to really try to identify the main barriers and challenges that you're facing for entrepreneurship and also for business incubation in general, and to identify the topics and questions that are of interest to you. Following part C will be focusing on ecosystem development. So you will get introduced to ecosystem mapping and building. And finally, part D will be focusing on mentoring programs. So this will cover the topic of design and implementation of a mentoring program. Just to let you know, so we will also have 15-minute breaks. 2 15-minute breaks are foreseen between session B and C and C and D. But we are, of course, flexible. So if let's say some of the sessions are longer or you have more questions, then we can be a little bit flexible and adapt the timing. Also, just to tell you about the logistics, so we will be asking you to write your questions down in the chat box throughout the session today, and we will be answering them as we go on, or also sometimes at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, just please feel free really to use the chat box, and we will make sure to reply to them. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about our 2 experts who are here with us today. Of course, you will hear more from themselves later on, but just to introduce, so Douglas Thompson is the manager of the international area at SPI. He has a vast experience and knowledge within implementing different sector evaluations and studies, and has worked a lot on capacity building and support services in the EU and globally as well. Francisco Rosa is also a senior consultant in SPI, and he focuses a lot on providing services and training in innovation management, on also SME development, and has worked on numerous projects funded by organizations such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Commission, and so on. And SPI is a consultancy company based in Portugal. So next slide, please. And now we would like to introduce the BIC Africa project to you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to a few words about EBN. So we at EBN are coordinating the BIC Africa project. EBN stands for the European Business and Innovation Center Network. So actually the organization started in 1985 and originally as also an EU-funded project. Its main goal was to really create a strong network of business incubators and what we call also BICs, so business innovation centers, that would support entrepreneurs and SMEs specifically focused on innovation. So today, actually, so we do so through the design, development, collaboration, and delivery of a wide range of technical business support services and also quality assessment and certification products. So EBN is quite specific in this regard, is that one of its core services is actually to certify its members. Sorry. So this quality certification is something that enables the entrepreneurs to know that the business incubators they engage with really provide high quality services. So this is one of our core activities, and also besides this, so the EU BICs, they provide a complex spectrum of entrepreneurial innovation support, including incubation, acceleration, internationalization, access to funding, and other support services. Next slide, please. So a little bit now about BIC Africa. So just to give you a global picture, so there are 5 country projects. So these projects are in Angola, in Comoros, in Ethiopia, in Madagascar, and in Somalia. All of them are financed by the European Union and implemented by different partners. So if you can see, Comoros is implemented by UNIDO, so is Madagascar and Somalia, whereas the Ethiopian project is implemented by SEQUA and Angola by IFC. So the goal of BIC Africa is really to create a regional network with dedicated capacity building and networking support, while also providing software networking services. So the aim is to create really a network interconnecting these 5 projects. Next slide, please. So indeed, it is about supporting business incubation, building innovation bridges, and fostering inclusive, decent job creation, via also building partnerships between the African and the European continent. Next slide, please. So who are the BIC Africa beneficiaries? So our direct beneficiaries are the business incubators. We work with business incubators. We don't directly work with entrepreneurs and SMEs, but of course, the final beneficiaries are the entrepreneurs, SMEs, and startups. Along the way, also indirect beneficiaries are involved in the different activities of the project. So these include policymakers, business angels, universities, EU delegations, and so on. Next slide, please. So to say a little bit more about the network services and support that we provide for the different country projects. Next slide, please. So how do we support the 5 country projects? So at the beginning, we've provided support in ecosystem mapping and also designing methodologies for the selection of incubators within this project. So So each of these 5 projects have really their dedicated work program, and it really varies. Also the number of how many incubators they support varies quite a lot. Some of them support between 3 and 5, others support 15 or more incubators. So we've been dealing with this process with the project. We also organize various network meetings, virtual and physical, and organize best practice exchanges between these 5 country projects. So, for example, our annual gatherings that take place every year and bring together all the stakeholders. We share opportunities with the incubators of the 5 countries, and we also organize various network programs, such as our acceleration programs targeted specifically at women entrepreneurs that we've been now running for 3 years in a row. Next slide, please. So this is just an image from our annual gathering last year, where we really brought together the community, all of the stakeholders from the 5 country projects, and also business incubators. Next slide, please. Yes, so just to zoom a little bit on the service offer that we have specifically for the business incubators who are involved in these 5 country projects. So we have capacity building and skill development services. So some examples of these are indeed this virtual training center with the first session being held today. We also have 5 national and 2 African on-site bootcamp trainings specifically for with the aim of capacity building of the business incubators. We also enable making better connections. So we will be running, actually starting from next year, soft landing services and staff exchange programs. So I will talk about this a little bit later. Then we are ensuring that the quality standards are respected. So actually the certification program of EBN I was talking about before, we are also adapting it to the African context. And we are running a quality certification label within BIC Africa, specifically for these 5 countries. We support with benefiting from exchanges and cooperation. So there are some activities related to connecting the incubators with diaspora members. And we also have other services such as awareness raising, helping the business incubators explore business opportunities, and so on. Next slide, please. Again, another picture from one of the national boot camps. So this was for Somali business incubators that we held at the beginning of this year, 2023. Next slide, please. Yes, so to talk a little bit more about the main activities that we are holding in Europe and online. So we had the European boot camp in the end of 2022. Where again we selected 16 business incubators from the country projects to participate in this event. We will be running, as said before, a soft landing for business incubator managers. So within this activity, we will be inviting African incubator managers to spend about a week in one of our quality certified business innovation centers in Europe. So again, this will be launched beginning next year, and there will be more information about it quite soon. We also have our annual online acceleration program for women entrepreneurs. So this can be interesting to those who are not directly involved in the country projects or who are not from these 5 countries, but from other sub-Saharan African countries, as this program is actually open to specifically to female entrepreneurs from all sub-Saharan African countries. So so there will be a 4th edition starting spring 2024, and we encourage people to apply online. Then there is the virtual training center program, which is this program, and it is launched today. Namely, And again, this is open to various sub-Saharan African business support organization. It is not limited to the 5 countries. So again, we encourage participation from all over Africa. And finally, we have Meet the Innovator online sessions. So this will be about mainly showcasing success stories by innovators from the diaspora communities of the 5 countries. So as you see, the first 2, those were our services in Europe, and the 3 I was talking about afterwards, those are all online services. And I would like to actually now hand over the word to David, who will talk a little bit more about the African services that we have, and also communication and so on. David, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Yeah, once again, I'm David. I would like to share with you a little bit about what we do. Yeah, as you can see on this picture, that we are weaving the community. So as mainly we're building a community. So this is one of the exercises we did last year in Brussels, where we bring together all the participating business incubator from the 5 countries. So basically what we are mainly doing is building a community, especially between these target countries. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick highlight, I mean, most of the things are my colleague or Christina has briefly shared with you. So I'll give you a highlight on especially the African activities we will do. Next, we have already 2 annual gathering did that bring together over 100 participants from different ecosystems as a network of all programs. So that we will do it every year. Next year we will do it also in Madagascar. Then we will have also a national bootcamp that's mainly specifically tailor-made to the country projects and co-designed with the country implementers. That will be also done through involving local and international experts in the field of innovation and ecosystem building. Then we will have also an African bootcamp that also targeting the participating business incubators. This will be done also in the coming year. We already had one this year, actually in Nairobi, Kenya, co-hosted by the BIC Somali team. The last but not least, we're going to have also staff exchange that will be between the 5 countries, so that the business incubators experts will have a chance to have a first-hand experience, especially to co-learn, co-create, because some of the contexts are similar. For example, if you take Ethiopia and Somalia, there are some similarities. So there is a chance to learn a lot and also exchange, but also collaborate and co-create for future. Likewise, if we look into Comoros and Madagascar. So these are the staff exchange program we will have within the African part. The next slide, please. Just this is also one of the exercise we did this for the country specific bootcamp. This is for the BIC Somali. We had this year as well. Of course, you'll see also one of our trainer in this session. This is also where also we connect within also the ecosystem that's designed based on their needs and it's tailor-made activities. Next slide, please. So as we talk mainly about network and community, so promotion and communication is going to be is the heart of what we do. So we also provide promotion support for the project, of course, but also for the business incubators and also the startups through, for example, the acceleration program we had. So among those main activities of promotion, we provide multiplying and dissemination activity of the country project, but also sharing success stories. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that in our website, social media. We are very active. We share different opportunities and also resources directly to business incubators, but also for startups and entrepreneurs. We also organize different joint events to disseminate, of course, different reports, studies, and learning we have from the country projects, but also vice versa, that we also learn a lot from the country project, but also then share that throughout event that we mentioned. We also collaborate, and this is also one of the chance you will learn and also take a look, so that you can also collaborate with us. So with this activity, we mainly do collaboration with Africa and Europe. So we will always look into those opportunities, and in collaboration, for example, in AfriLab annual gathering, we were there and exhibit our activity, but also showcase the selected and participant incubators. Last but not least, we promote country projects in special events that focusing ecosystem building, innovation across Europe, but also in Africa. For example, we will also use regularly the EBN Congress, the Enriching Africa Congress, something like that. So we brought together some activities, but also forums, and also share the experience and learnings from the country project, but also from the regional network. With this, I'll pass that to my colleague, Christina. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, David, for presenting this. And yeah, maybe so just some final words about the BIC Africa quality label for business incubators, which I already mentioned. So indeed, we launched this quality label, taking advantage of the EBN expertise in incubator certification, which we, of course, do all over Europe and also beyond Europe. And now we're trying to, of course, adapt it to the context of each of these 5 countries to see what is relevant to them and to adapt the quality label in an appropriate manner. We, of course, also involve the implementing partners in this collaboration and on this process. The aim is, again, to assure somehow the entrepreneurs who get involved within these business incubators that the services are of high quality. And also through these, we contribute to attracting investors and funding the client companies of these business incubators. So this is the idea behind it. Next slide, please. And finally, so once again, this is the BIC Africa team at EBN. So so myself, David, who you met today, and our team leader, Robert Sanders, who will be joining us a little bit later today. And with that, I would like to thank you again for joining this session today. And we really hope that it will be very useful for you. And that you will have the opportunity to learn and to exchange also with the experts, also with other participants here today. And don't forget to follow our social media channels and to get updated about the latest news. So I'm happy to hand over the word to Douglas Thompson now, who will be delivering the next section of today's session. Thank you very much. Thank you, Douglas.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christina, and I hope everyone can hear and see me. As was introduced, my name is Douglas Thompson. You might have seen my picture my face in a couple of those pictures that was just shown. So I've been involved in BIC Africa for a while now, including developing and implementing capacity building sessions both within Europe and Ethiopia, and of course for the Somali business incubators as well. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today, and indeed in being involved in the rest of the other 3 sessions that are coming up as Christina identified. It's a privilege for me to be here, and it's very exciting. It's very interesting for me. I hope that we, myself and Francisco and you all, we have a good first session today. Obviously, so thank you to BIC Africa. Thanks also, of course, to the European Commission and European Union for the funding for allowing BIC Africa to be implemented. So what I wanted to do, first of all, as is shown quite hopefully clearly on the screen, is a first quite short session to set the scene and the challenges for business incubation. The idea here is to have a background of some of the materials that have been identified and provided either through BIC Africa or other organizations, and indeed then go in to identify ourselves the specific challenges but the participants and us we are finding here today. The point there being that we can then understand and use that information on the specific challenges to help us target in some way the rest of the sessions coming up this year, and of course in next year and afterwards. To do that, in terms of interacting, we're a relatively big group here today. What we wanted to do is, as we go through, we'll show some slides, some questions which we want to use the Slido tool for. Hopefully, that'll be easier for you to click on the QR code or to click on the address, which will be sent in the chat as well, to answer those simple questions to help us and influence what's going on today and the rest of the sessions. And also, could I ask, we really want to, any questions that you have, we would really love if you could put those in the chat, please. And what we'll do is we'll either deal with them as we go through, or after each of the individual parts. Of course, we've got time for Q&A to make sure that we answer all your questions. So if you could put those in the chat, that would be very, we would be very appreciative indeed. Having said that, let me first of all go to the one thing which I wanted to show, which was an output from BIC Africa. It's called the BIC Africa Diagnostic and Stakeholder Mapping Report. More specifically, it's the mapping of international and regional public and private donors and initiatives. Now, this was published in 2023. It was ourselves who did it with BIC Africa, and it's really the first attempt to identify and measure for the project the increasing number of organizations and initiatives that are supporting business and supporting businesses and new businesses in the widest sense. You might be able to see on the screen that the main target was the first 4 countries in BIC Africa for this. But if I show you the next screen, you'll also be able to see. But in fact, over 50% of the initiatives, of the projects, of the organizations that we identified, and we had just under 400 in total, are located obviously in the relevant African region, but outside of those four countries. So it's our first attempt to have a focus on the BIC Africa countries, but also set the scene, have an overview, of course, of the rest of the relevant comparator countries as well. It's a very wide remit. We're not only focusing on, say, incubators. So it's really any activities that are focused on promoting entrepreneurship. So accelerators, networks, associations, co-working spaces, incubators themselves, combined incubators, accelerators, investors, programs that focus on, and organizations that focus on access to finance, other programs and projects, startup competitions, university-based organizations. The point here was to try to find, in the widest definition, what is currently going, what is currently going on within the continent, and more specifically within the countries of BIC Africa. Of course, it's our first attempt. What we're hoping to do as we go through the project is to further it, to target the other countries as they enter, and also to further it to, as we get to know more and more organizations within the countries, to make sure that they are included in this initial mapping. So just under 400 entities were analyzed, and of which just under half were in the original four countries of BIC Africa, of Angola, Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Somalia. This, of course, report is available on the website, on the address that was given, and of course these slides are going to be available to all participants. So, just getting into just an overview to start off with. So, we identified 10 typologies of organizations, as was described before. By far the most which we identified, and this is partly due to the process of how we did it and the fact that it's a first attempt. Of course, the concept of in terms of identification and mapping, the concept of low-hanging fruit is of course important here. And so in some cases, it's easier to identify programs and projects than other types of organizations. There's also, I think, some overlap in terminology as well, but which we want to get improved as we go through and improve this process. In particular, so my video has been shut off. In particular for identifying really what is an incubator, what's an accelerator, what's a combined, what's the difference between university-based incubators and say for-profit-based incubators. But as you can see, the vast majority of the organizations or the entities, elements of the just under 400 were programs and projects, followed by incubators in their various formats and accelerators in their various formats as well. It's noticeable that we found more difficulty in identifying, for instance, investors and access to finance, and that's really quite an important aspect, as you can see in session 3 and session 4 of this four-session program on 6th of December and 13th of December. We're really focusing on investors and access to finance, which I think is a very important aspect of the practical nature of this particular program. Okay. In terms of market sectors as well, of course, we were trying to look at market sectors. I hope you can see it. I hope you can see this diagram on your screen. I hope you can see this diagram on your screen. So when we did try to identify the market sectors in which the entities were included. The vast majority of the ones which in this view regard themselves as undifferentiated, i.e., they don't focus on any specific sector, or rather they allow themselves to focus on a number of sectors. Perhaps is a better way of identifying it. Of course, though, but that's what I think is interesting is that within the sectors that we could identify, by far the largest were tech, digital, and agriculture. I think that reflects the nature of the nature of the incubators, the nature of the elements that we identified within the specific countries. It's very interesting that the largest sector is indeed tech digital. I think that shows, a very important aspect of the incubators, for instance, that we're looking at, but very much moving to very focused, very value-added type sectors. We also have education, health, energy, etc. But these were a much smaller percentage of the sector-based focus of the organizations and initiatives activity.
Douglas?
Yes.
Yeah, we have a question on the chat regarding the previous slide on how is the given percentage compared. So maybe we can try to explain a little bit how the numbers were taken and the differences between the numbers.
Yes,
and also there was another question now that relates to the second slide, which concerns which is the sector of main focus of BIC Africa.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much. I really very appreciate the question. Please do keep them coming. Yes, and this is of course explained further in the report. When we're talking about percentages, we're talking a percentage of the 393 elements that were identified. And in this case, which we're clearly trying to make sure that it's a one-to-one mapping in the sense of whilst one element might indeed be allocated to for instance, to several different market sectors or several different categories, we really tried to make sure at this stage, but we tried to have a one-to-one mapping to have a level of clarity. So in fact, 9% of the 393 entities, for instance, would be classified as incubators. So say 10%, it's about 40 of them, very roughly. However, of course, we did also have 6% of accelerators and 6% of incubator accelerators. So in one way, it might be easier to add all of those together if we're talking about incubators and acceleration organizations, or those who classify themselves as incubators or accelerators. Indeed, the 5% of university-based incubators can also be included there. Sometimes university-based incubators have a slightly different model, a slightly different governance, a slightly different objective than say for-profit incubators, which is why we split that. I hope that answers your question. In terms of the sector for BIC Africa, Christina or David, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that BIC Africa, by definition, doesn't focus on specific sectors. Of course, some of the individual projects within the individual countries, of course, are going to highlight some sectors which are of most interest, of most relevance to those countries. But the idea of BIC Africa is to bring everything together, and so at one level, we all sectors are invited. But Christina, any?
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. Yeah, that's correct. So indeed, all sectors are covered. Of course, some projects indeed, for example, focus more on the agri aspect, or on incubators who help, for example, tech or deep tech startups. But in general, there is no specific sector focus. Thank you, Douglas.
Thanks, Christina. Thank you for the question. Sorry, I didn't take note of who asked questions, but please do keep them coming. Thank you so much. Hopefully I answered your question. I did want to go on to we have 3 or 4 of these slides about the results, so not too many. We didn't want to give too many details. This one is about the main business orientation when it's identified of those up to 400 entities. Here you can see exactly 1/3, in fact, say that the main one is skills development. Of course, this means capacity building. It means helping entrepreneurs, SMEs, and incubators improve their capacities. But I did want to actually focus on some of the other numbers here, which I thought was interesting. Over 20% were trying to focus their activities on access to funding, which of course I think is quite interesting, especially given what we're going to be speaking about in session 3 and session 4, about how incubators can do that in a more practical way. Also, 20% about business model development and business model development and strategy. I personally would include mentoring or creating mentoring programs in that aspect, in that type of orientation as well, and we'll have a small subsession on that later on today. And I think it is interesting, but in total, nearly or over 20% look at innovation, look at technology adaptation, look at product improvement and marketing improvement, especially innovation, tech adoption, and product improvement. So really helping getting into the engineering aspects of the SME, the engineering aspects of the entrepreneur, and the new product as well. So I thought that was very interesting as well, coming out from the results. We have one person saying that he can't hear me. If there's anyone else who has issues, then maybe I can ask them to put that in the chat to see if there's where the issue is. Okay, thank you. So moving on, again, in terms of main services provided, I think we've got two main aspects here, reflecting what we had before. Of course, over half is capacity building, but I really do like this idea that well over 1/3 is about funding, is about networking, is about really, for instance, incubators, accelerators, other programs, other projects, trying to help this very significant challenge, which is always identified about how entrepreneurs, how SMEs can access funding, can access new funding. We've done a number of projects, going back a number of years, about working with banks, about trying to create new funding schemes, both formal and informal. And I think it's interesting that this has identified that as one of the services, which have been identified within that selection of 400. Okay, just moving on to the final few slides on this in terms of governance. This wasn't, I'm not sure if I expected this or not, but about 2/3 regarded themselves as non-profit organization or not-for-profit, organizations. Of course, programs and projects, our key driver of that. But there's also university-based incubators as well, who are publicly governed and not-for-profit. In terms of private for-profit organizations, which were in this sample were just over 1/5. Of course, accelerators, co-working space, incubators, they were by far the largest proportion of that. So we're seeing, at least in this sample, that the governance structures, which of course drive often a lot of the fund of where organizations get that, and elements get their funding from, and what their objectives are, there's quite a large proportion, or 2/3 being not-for-profit type focus. And the last slide, in terms of the results, we were actually quite interested also in the location of, say, the organizations, the incubators, the programs, the projects, etc. I'm not sure this is easy to understand, so let me explain it. Just under a third, 32%, were solely located in the capital city. So, having said that, that means over 2/3 were located either in other areas or in other areas, including the capital cities. In fact, 58% were involved in several locations, including the capital cities, but also other cities, other locations within the country. So you can really see that a significant proportion had either countrywide coverage, or more likely, in fact, and more examples, had locations and a focus not just in the capital city, but the capital city plus 2 or 3 other locations. Only 10% we identified were located only outside the capital cities. Of course, part of that again is going to be sample distribution, in terms of how easy it is to access the information concerning these. So as we go through, and try to update this analysis, I'm thinking we'll find more and more who are focused only on the capital, only outside the capital cities, as well as the variety. Just the last thing I wanted to show, I know this is not intended for you to be able to read, but we have just to highlight that the individual countries, of course, we have individual country analysis within the report, which as I said, is provided easily downloadable from the BIC Africa website. It's designed quite nicely, and so we're hoping that it gives a basic and a sort of background understanding, the kind of setting the scene, but that this session is meant to be aimed at. Okay. Please do put any more questions in the chat. There was one about administrative question about recordings. Maybe I'll answer that at the end of this part. In terms of setting the scene as well, we also wanted to show some. I don't want to say the results, more the structure of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. Now, some of you might know what that is. I'm sure most of you will not. However, let me show you why it is we wanted to see this as a setting the scene exercise. So the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor counts itself as the world's foremost entrepreneurship study since 1999. The website is here. It's just gemconsortium.org. Some of you might know it. It's within the entrepreneurship community, in terms of policies and in terms of studies. It is an interesting, well-known study. But why is that? Okay, it claims to be the largest independent study of entrepreneurship in the world. Of course, there are different categories of that, different measures, different ways to measure that. I myself, I've been involved in SBI Angola from 2008, and GEM Angola from 2008, and GEM in Portugal since 2004, I think it was. Yes, I think it was 2004. I'm not getting any younger, unfortunately. The idea is to analyze the relationship between the level of entrepreneurship and economic growth, determine conditions that stimulate and block entrepreneurial dynamics, and that's why we're interested in it, I think, today, rather than the specific results. It publishes annually. It had 50 economies in 2022. It is to be admitted that I think it's the GEM sample of countries is weaker in Africa than some other continents. That's something which we would like to improve. And indeed, there are some countries, South Africa, Angola, for instance, that are included. The idea is that it creates insights about how to foster startups and entrepreneurship. And it's so old in the sense it's got since 1999. All the data is publicly available apart from the last year's data. So data becomes publicly available after 2 years. So there's a whole series of data which you might be interested in to look at. But why are we interested in it today? Firstly, as you'll see at the top of the slide, it has adult population survey And that, but I don't want to get into the details, but the idea here is that it's very good at identifying how many people, how many entrepreneurs, what is the proportion of entrepreneurs in a country compared to the others? In fact, in some certain African countries, including Angola, the percentage of entrepreneurs as a percentage of the total population is much higher than in other countries in Europe, for instance. But also, who are they? Why are they doing it? What's their attitudes? What's their social economic background? It's very interesting, in fact. But that's not really what we wanted to briefly introduce today. What we wanted to briefly introduce today was something called the National Experts Evaluation of the framework and conditions of what supports entrepreneurship and new businesses. These framework conditions derive from many decades of research, and the idea is that these framework conditions provide key drivers for startups. And what GEM does is asks a lot of what are called national experts, very quantitative questions about this. And that's quite interesting, partly for the country itself, but also, of course, because you have this huge data set. In total, GEM's been in over 100 countries over its lifetime. So you've got this huge data set to look at. But what are these framework conditions? I put 9 here. Quite frankly, they sometimes move up and down in terms of a number, but 9 is a good number. And I'll leave you a chance just to we'll just leave you a chance to read those for a second. I don't think this isn't rocket science in a sense. I think these are quite normal. Ideas of what drives entrepreneurship within a country. So access to finance, of course, government policy, government programs, education at school, and beyond, transfer of R&D. Remind you that so over around 20% or 20% or a third, we're talking about product development and how incubators, for instance, can help on innovation and product development. That's exactly could be seen within R&D transfer. Commercial and professional infrastructures, accountancy, legal services, marketing, etc. Ease of entry into the market, very important about a country's regulatory environment, about creating and setting up new businesses, how to enter into new markets. In many countries, physical infrastructure can be either a challenge or a driver, roads, energy, water, internet, etc. And something which I find very interesting, social and cultural norms. Is the social and cultural norm, for instance, like in Angola, like when we were doing it, but it drives there's an entrepreneurial spirit. There's a lack of a fear of failure that allows people to feel themselves that yes, I can go to be an entrepreneur, and how that in certain countries, which I work in Europe, sometimes there's very strong fear of failure. There's social and cultural norms, a very strong fear of failure, and that doesn't help entrepreneurship at all. But we're trying to educate people, but failure is not a problem. Failure could be seen as a benefit for the next opportunity. So these are the 9 GEM framework conditions. Actually, we split them a bit into specific aspects, which I just wanted to show you rather than not going through. So entrepreneurial education at school and outside of school, for instance. But really, what we wanted to do was focus on these 9 frameworks. Because now, if it's okay with you, Francesco, am I missing any questions? Or
no, not at this point.
Okay, so please put any more questions in the chat. But what we wanted to do now, after showing one more slide about Angola, this is just really the results of the framework conditions and how we can show it. We can quantify the results. We can compare it to the other GEM countries and see. This is quite interesting. See, for instance, in cultural social norms, on the other entrepreneurial finance, etc., the comparison between countries from, in this case, Angola, and the norm, the average for other GEM countries, or average for other sections of GEM countries. One can compare with South Africa, some of the other countries in Africa, for instance, to see how incubators and entrepreneurship support organizations, how they can impact any of these framework conditions to improve the situation.
Yes. Douglas, we do have an interesting question on some examples of the access to finance related with the framework conditions.
Yes, of course. Let me. Thank you. Yes, and I think this is very important. Here GEM tries to simplify things as much as possible, and as we all know, that things are never as simple. Things are always more complex than perhaps can be measured. But in GEM, for these expert surveys, we try to identify just two. One is, are there sufficient funds for new startups? So we're not here actually identifying, do we mean public funds? Do we mean private funds? These come later in the more detailed interviews. But just are there sufficient funds? And but it's not binomial. It's not binomial is the wrong word. It's not. They're asked to rank between 1 and 9 or 1 and 10. 1 and 5. Sort of, yes, in my countries there are sufficient. The question is, in my country, are there sufficient funds for new startups? 5 is yes, I agree totally. 1 is I disagree totally. And of course, there's a ranking in between. And the second aspect of that, well, there might be funds available, but are they easy to access? Again, ranking between 1 and 5. In terms of more detailed questions about entrepreneurial finance, they aren't asked within the GEM structured methodology. But what happens is then you have questions, and then of course you're talking about, well, what type of finance is it? Is it going? Is it formal financing through banks? I mean, or going all the way through the systems to IPOs. A lot of and of course a lot of focus as well on any informal financing as well, and indeed microcredit, etc. I hope that answers your question. If not, then please do further your question in chat, and we'll come back to it. So if I can then move on, then we have 2 questions that we want to ask using Slido. If you see here, there's a QR code within the chat as well. As you just put in, there's a link within the chat as well. We're now going to switch we're going to switch screens if we can to see the results. But let me look at the question first. So what are the most relevant framework conditions that incubators can impact in your country? We thought we might want to focus the question a bit on what incubators, or let's say organizations that further entrepreneurship and new businesses within your country. So what are the most relevant framework conditions between those 9 that you think that you as an incubator, or you as an entity, or incubators or entities in your country can impact? We've identified, please select the 3 most relevant. In fact, you can select 2, you can select 4. We're not limiting here really within the Slido. But to get some sort of comparison, it would be good to limit the number of choices. So I will stop sharing this.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, you should be able to see it on the screen.
I can see it on the screen, but please put in comments if you're having difficulty to doing it. We'll wait a few minutes. We've got plenty of time, and I think because it's a multiple choice of 9, so it will take a few minutes, I think, to read the question. Again, please do put in the chat if you've got any problems with doing it. Let me explain, but this is very important for us because this also allows us to target some of the material coming up, even within the next few sessions during the next few weeks, but also for the sessions in 2024 and 2025. And I think already we're actually getting some I would say interesting aspects which perhaps I hadn't quite realized would be so important. This is very interesting. This is very interesting indeed. Okay. You notice that we're not seeing the whole screen. I also noticed that not everyone has yet had a go. I see. Yes, we are. Please do link on if you can. We appreciate as many results as possible. And maybe another 30 seconds or so for anyone else who was wanting to interact. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. I certainly appreciate. Yes, I think you've got a good question. There's a good question here. A good point by Mikhail. It would be better if we could rank the FCs. Yes, we were when we were thinking about this, we were wondering how much time it could. Literally, it's just a logistical issue. How much time it could take. We're more than happy actually after this meeting to send the participants an updated poll where we can rank either from 1 to 5 or rank, perhaps just rank the 9 in order. Let us do that actually. Let us do that. We're a little worried, but perhaps within this particular session it might be hard to do that. But it's a very good point. So let us do that. Thank you, Mikhail, for your point. In terms of here, access to entrepreneurial finance, that's a huge one. 100% of all the people who answered identified it as one of the most relevant. That's really helpful to us actually, because session 3 and session 4 focus on that. Very interesting, but entrepreneurial education in school, I think, is identified here by about 2/3 of the people who answered. Very, very, very interested that it's seen as an important thing, but it can be impacted, and of course the importance of government policies is clear as well, and slightly less so, but still relevant in terms of R&D transfer. I think R&D transfer is very interesting for us. We're very interested in, I think, BIC Africa as well, in working with incubators and organizations, but I really have a good level of interest in product development and R&D transfer. So thank you so much for that. We have one more question
on the screen
as well. Yes, yeah. We have one more question as well in this session. So question 2. This is to write words, and so I appreciate this might be harder to think about, but what are the main barriers and challenges? But it's this for incubators in your country. Just please identify, say, up to 3 the biggest challenges and barriers. Just in a few short, just a couple of short words, etc. We would appreciate that, because again, we can take that terminology and make sure that we deal with that in the sessions to come. So if I can repeat the question, so what are the main challenges and barriers that exist for incubators in your country? So if you can identify any, you just type in any of those barriers up to 3, but it doesn't really matter how many. I hope this works as well. And maybe if there's anyone answering, we can already go to the screen.
I will, Douglas. So I believe you're seeing this.
Yeah, so we're seeing a number of people typing. Oh, interesting. Criteria for choosing SMEs, very interesting, yes. Funding, yes, absolutely. Brilliant. But a number of people still typing, so I'm going to leave it. Hopefully, you can still see the world's cloud as the word cloud. Sorry. And just to say, this will be the final. This is going to be the final aspect of this introductory session. As soon as this is over, then of course we can then move on to the next session, which would be on ecosystem mapping in effect. I want to keep this going because I think we've got some very interesting aspects here. access to finance, of course, being as in all these tools, if words are repeated, then of course they are shown larger. Okay, going to wait for another 20. We've got one more participant, so maybe just waiting for another 20 or 30 seconds. Before we briefly go over them. Okay, interesting, very interesting. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your inputs here. It's very important, but please do keep them going. But I think I might start talking about them for sake of time. So access to finance, I think, is identified here again, and that's interesting. And the knowledge of incubators and technical skills, etc. I think. I very much hope that the BIC Africa and the individual BIC country projects can help on this. This increase of to try to provide capacity building exercises and guides which incubators and other support organizations can use. Maybe just to highlight something which is going to be discussed at the end of today. In mentoring, we've developed which we hope is a very practical guide, very short, 12 pages, of how to implement a mentoring program as an incubator. So these are kind of tools which I think the BIC Africa project is trying to identify. Criteria for choosing SMEs, that really has come up a number of times, and it's very interesting how to identify those organizations that A, are going to be incubated, and B, then the types of services. And I think whilst perhaps I'm not the best person to talk about that, I think we've got some interest in the sessions coming up, especially how to find investment for those SMEs. I think that will come involved in that will be involved in that as well. Funding, obviously, both funding for the incubator and funding for the incubatees, I think, is important. And then we have a number of ones which I think are around that as well, about legislation, about policy, about legal barriers, and I think, of course, how it's not, and how incubators can try to impact that, and how, for instance, BIC Africa and the BIC Africa countries, and those who lead those projects, have an impact on those government programs, on those government legislators. Poor investor networking, I think, is a very important thing, and that will be in sessions 3 and 4. So I think now that's very interesting. Thank you so much. Let's make sure that we're of course keeping a record of this, and we'll try to make sure that the sessions coming up link to these in the best way that we can, even the next 3 sessions over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and also, of course, the ones next year. Okay. So maybe we can go back to maybe just on your screen, for instance, go back to the question on the screen. Now it's now just after it's just after the hour, so we're basically on time. We're only five minutes late. Now in our diary, in our agenda. So can you maybe stop sharing now? Yes. I'll get to the next one. Of course. Okay. Let me then share my screen back. Just 1 second. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yes. Okay. Question 1. Okay. So the idea now is to go into ecosystem development, and obviously a particular focus on this stage of ecosystem mapping. In the agenda, we had a short 10-minute break, which can be allocated to questions and answers, which I don't see anymore in the chat, but please do put any more questions in the chat, and we'll come back and do them. Or just have a 10-minute, we have an opportunity to have a 10-minute break, or just go straight into ecosystem development. Christina, maybe I can just ask whether you have an opinion on this. I'm very happy to have a 10-minute break and then start again with ecosystem development. We want this to be interactive. We want this to be pleasant for people. So very happy to implement a 10-minute break here.
Yes, why not? I agree. I think it would be a good idea. Maybe we meet again in 10 minutes in that case.
Yes, which is, I'm just going to say 20 past the hour. It's now 10 past the hour. 20
yes,
past
exactly.
the hour. So because I know people are in different time zones. Yes, I think you've on the chats you've got support for a break as well. So let's have a break. Let's come back at 10 past the hour, and then we'll go into ecosystem development and then into mentoring. So thank you so much for all your interaction so far. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for answering the slide. It's very important for us. And let's get back in 10 minutes time at 20 past the hour to look at part C, ecosystem development. Thank you so much. Thank you. See you in 10 minutes.
I think we can continue. Douglas, I'm not sure we can hear you.
Nope, we were just talking. We're just setting up. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Excellent, thank you. So thank you so much for returning. I hope everyone had a good break. The next session, and again, thank you so much for the first session. Please continue to put questions into the chat. We're now going to move on to ecosystem development for about an hour or so, and then move on to mentoring. So my colleague Francisco, who's been previously introduced, is going to start. So please do go ahead.
Thank you, Douglas, and hello, good afternoon to all. It's a great pleasure to be here. Repeating a little what was mentioned by Douglas at the beginning, I would like also to thank BIC Africa and to thank you, all of you, to be here in this session, and hopefully we can provide now in this part C relevant information on how you can develop an ecosystem. As Douglas mentioned, this session will take around an hour. We will also have a moment to discuss via a question that we will be posing a little bit in the middle of the presentation, but also, as it was made in the last part, please put your questions in the chat. We will try to answer all of them as we go through. And also the idea is that we try to make it as interactive as possible, given these questions that can be put in the chat. So as I mentioned, this part C will now focus on what you can do to develop the ecosystem. And for this, we believe it is relevant to discuss how can you map the entrepreneurship ecosystem to support incubators in identifying relevant opportunities for creation of new businesses and new services. So the idea is that at the end, you will be able to be aware of some relevant tools that can support you in this process of mapping the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we are talking here on the mapping, of course, usually at a very early stage on when you are setting up either your incubators or even your support programs, and or while you are developing a new support program in your ecosystem, and want to understand how you can map what exists in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so the idea is that this part provides you with some examples and relevant tools to do so. So getting onto it, yes, please. I was seeing that the slide wasn't changed. So as mentioned, yes, getting onto it, to develop this mapping, we based this talk in a methodology that was actually developed by GIZ in 2019, which is a guide for mapping the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So this is basically a guide that you can access through the link. Of course, this will be shared with you as well after this presentation. But it basically aims to provide a practical approach that can produce results in a very few period in time. Actually, this methodology that is going to be presented takes around 4 weeks to develop. And basically, it wants to help you in designing effective interventions and tools to stimulate entrepreneurship and defining the ecosystem. And also to have, you will see that this guide provides several practical tools for you to use during your process of mapping the ecosystem. So we want, of course, in this session to provide an introduction to the guide, to guide you through some of these steps that are included in this document. And of course, if you feel free to do so, afterwards you can, of course, refer to the guide, go to the document, and you will see many further details on this aspect. So you will see in the next slide the structure of the 5 steps to map the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So for each one of these steps, the guide describes in detail what has to be done and offers some practical tools to do that. So this includes, for example, a list of indicators that you can use, information on data sources, or, for example, samples of questions or structured interviews, or how to develop relevant workshops to try to map as best as possible the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The 5 steps that are described in the guide are those that are listed on the slide. So first step, a research design. A second one concerning data collection, and then analyzing that data. After that, validating it, so step 4. And then at the end, with all of this information that you have collected, analyzed, and validated, transition from the mapping to the activity of being involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and in mapping this ecosystem. So as mentioned on the slide, it targets specifically those that are implementing development programs or that are developing activities that are related with entrepreneurship and with the promotion of small, medium enterprises and also micro SMEs and also startups. You can go to the next slide, please, and you will see that what we aim to show, and you will see that this is a very comprehensive guide. So basically, this summarizes this slide with this picture, the total number of tools and examples that the guide provides within each step. So you'll see, this is, as I mentioned, a very descriptive guide. It has more than 15 tools that you can use within the different steps, and 6 examples of different aspects that you can use concerning each one of these steps.
There's a question,
yes.
Is it also relevant to startups?
Yes, that's a very good question. Although the guide is specifically targeting, as I mentioned, incubators that are starting to map their own ecosystem, or incubators that want to develop a new program and they need to do and to go through this step of mapping the ecosystem, we believe in many of the aspects that are related with this process are, of course, very interesting to startups, because we are talking here about aspects such as how to collect data on a specific sector, how to identify relevant actors in a specific ecosystem. Then after doing that, how can you involve these actors? How can you collaborate with these actors? So there are many aspects of the steps and the tools that we are utilizing here that can, of course, be very much relevant, in our opinion, to startups and to entrepreneurs that want to start their businesses, want to understand how the ecosystem is built. So we would say definitely yes, this tool is also for them and for other institutions that are starting to map their own ecosystem. I hope that answered your question. If that is the case, the next slide presents, of course, this is a mapping exercise. It's a guide that we want to follow, and it follows, of course, a timeline. This timeline that is presented is, of course, a standard timeline, but it is dependent on the entity, on the context, and, of course, on the exercise itself. So the timings for each step may vary according to whoever is implementing this guide. In any case, it is important to note, as I said at the beginning, that this exercise should take around 4 weeks. Of course, it is, as I mentioned, dependent on the specific mapping exercise. And in terms of the steps, you will see that step 2, the data collection aspect, is the one that takes more time, in principle around 2 weeks. Of course, this will be the step, and I will go through each one of them in detail, but this is the step where you will collect all the data that we will then analyze. So, of course, it is the step that takes more time and more effort from the implementation unit. And then the second one that takes more time within this process concerns step 5 of the activity, when you pass from concluding from conclusions from the results you have taken from the last 4 steps and passing it to activity within your ecosystem. Before going through each one of these steps in detail, in the next slide, we want to show, I think in the next slide, because I don't know if it is exactly, we want to show, and it is important that we talk about one concept that is defined in the guide, which concerns the different elements of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Of course, we heard Douglas talking about the framework conditions that are related with entrepreneurship activity. We have many different studies that describe the entrepreneurial ecosystem and that describe different specific aspects that compose the ecosystem. But this specific guide defines the entrepreneurial ecosystem as a product of 3 things. First, the surrounding environment. And here, the guide talks about the business environment and investment climate. If Douglas, you put a next point, the image, the graphic representation will appear of this business environment and investment climate. I hope you can read it. It's not that big, but again, we will share this information with you later on. But here, the business environment is basically defined as a complex structure of policies, legal institution conditions, business activity, quality of regulatory governance, and so on. And besides that, you will have another view which concerns the investment climate. So concerning the political situation, the infrastructure, the human resources and skills, the rule of law, the financial market. So all of this is relevant for defining your entrepreneurial ecosystem concerning your business environment and investment climate. You will see that many of these aspects were mentioned, for example, by Douglas when he was discussing the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor report. So, of course, there are a lot of similarities with other tools and studies that have been done in the sector. The second element that we need to take into consideration concerns the actors. So here the guide, the mapping guide basically defines 3 types of actors. First, individuals, and this includes either business founders or even investors. Second, organizations. So here we are talking, for example, about companies, universities, banks, and so on. So managed by an institution. And the third type of factors is what the guide names as institutions, but institutions from the sociological point of view. We mean when we talk about values, about family, or about religion. And this, of course, impacts the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So these are the 3 types of factors that are defined under the guide. The third element that is relevant, and again, there's a lot of similarities with what was said during the GEM report, but the third element that needs to be taken into consideration concerns culture and attitudes. Of course, culture of a society has a large impact on the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It affects the attitudes of the individuals and the organizations towards entrepreneurship, and so it has a big impact on the entrepreneurial ecosystem as a whole. So this is also considered during the mapping when developing the different steps that we will do for providing this exercise. So having said this, we have set the tone for what will come next, which will be the specific definition of the steps.
Before then, there's a question from Silvio about they're currently doing a benchmark study for an innovation lab at a bank. Mm-hmm. Maybe could they use elements or part of this structure?
Very good. That's a very good point, Silvio, because you will see in our step 2, when we talk about collecting information, that we will show some examples of, actually they are called, they are tables, they are tools, but you will see some examples of tables that structure information from benchmarking reports. So we actually target specifically this in the process of trying to map the ecosystem. So I think it can be useful for you to see some of these tools that are being used, to see some of the examples that are taken, not only from specific reports on entrepreneurship, but the methodology that is used to summarize those findings and summarize that information. So I definitely think this can be of relevance to you. Okay. Very good. So as mentioned, the idea is now that we go through each step in detail and we try to provide you some of the examples and tools that are showed in the guide. Again, I would like to highlight this one more time, is that, of course, the guide includes more than 15 tools and several examples that are divided within the steps. So during this presentation, we will not, of course, have time to go through each one of these tools, but we want to show you some as examples of what you can get and what you can access in case you are interested in this guide. So the first step of the mapping process is step one, as you see there in the slide, research design, but aims to elaborate and agree on this exercise of designing the research and defining all the steps that will need to be taken during the mapping process. So basically, we want to set up at this stage the operational framework that we will then use during the whole mapping process. This is, of course, essential to have this step well done and carefully done, because we want to ensure that the process of the mapping goes smoothly and in a timely manner as much as possible. So this should provide sufficient detail and instructions so that anyone actually in your organization or institution, or even people from outside your institution that have a specific interest on the mapping of the ecosystem, can also use it and repeat it in a specific context. Okay. This first step, basically, we are going to define our process according to 6 points. First, what is the scope of the mapping? Second, the target group. Third, what's our main research question that we want to answer? Fourth, what will be our methods of data collection that we will then use in the next step? How are we going to compare the results, and what are the expected? How are we going to compare the values, and how are we expecting the results that we'll take from this mapping? Okay, I will show you, but just before that, I will show you some examples of what information we can include within each of these components. But just summarizing, as you see in the table, main objective of step one: create a roadmap for the mapping process, a roadmap that is clear. The guide also includes an estimation of time. Again, this is not strict. The time might change depending on the context, depending on who is implementing this mapping, but it should be a rather quick process that should take around 1 day. There are within the guide some examples of the work plans that you can set up for collecting the data, and also a summary of what can be a research design step that we will show just before moving. And also, what are potentially the main challenges here is that you have, of course, different partners that have different expectations, and so the output of the mapping might not be in line with the expectations of those different partners. So there is a need to understand this and to try to match the expectations with what the different partners want and what the different partners want to have at the end of the mapping. So the next slide will show you this example of the research design. So I will go quickly through each, but just to get an idea of what you can expect to have at the end of this step when you are doing the mapping. So first, the first element that we need to define is the scope of the mapping. So here you will see aspects such as geographic location, what is the specific topic of the ecosystem that you want to map, and at what business phase you are currently going on. The second point concerns the research questions, and this is very important. So we want to have factors such as the relevance of our research question, the feasibility and clarity of what we are doing. So you see, for example, what are the supportive structures and constraints for entrepreneurs who follow, and in this case, the topic is focused on green and inclusive business. So follow a green and inclusive business model in the capital. So we want to answer this question to understand what are the supportive structures and constraints for entrepreneurs, to understand that how that is going in the ecosystem. The third point that we want, of course, to observe is the target group. Who are these entrepreneurs or this ecosystem that we want to map? In this case, was specifically mentioned as an example, entrepreneurs and small and growing businesses in those areas. Green and inclusive business models located in the capital and with growth ambitions. Then we have comparative results. With whom do we want to compare this mapping exercise? Some examples there, other big cities in the same countries, or capitals from other countries. So this is very important, and it goes back also to Silvio's question on the benchmarking, which is also something that is taken into consideration in the next steps. Then you have the expected results, what you want to achieve, what you want to agree on the results, and how we will use them. So you have there examples of we want to have an overview of the entrepreneurial status quo and what are the support structures that exist. It is important that we clearly identify what we expect to achieve at the end. And then, of course, the methodology that we are going to use to collect this information to map. You have there benchmarking reports, statistics, interviews, but there are many others that we are going to show in the next steps. So after you have designed your operational framework for the mapping, you move on to step 2, where you will start the process of collecting data. So this, of course, this data collection can be divided in 2 parts. First, which is the use of secondary data, and here we would highlight the methodology of desk research to collect data. And then a second phase where you will try to collect primary data. So here, when we talk about, as I mentioned, secondary data collection, we are talking about desk research. And when we are talking about primary data collection, we are talking mainly of 3 methodologies. First, survey. The second is a focus group discussion. And the third is interviews. As you see in the table, and summarizing what this step entails, the main goal is, of course, to gather the information. So gather all the information that you can on the ecosystem so that you can then analyze it in the next step. So this is, as I mentioned, one of the most important steps in the whole methodology. It's the one that takes most time to complete, and of course needs to be done according to what we have previously established in step 1. You will see there, and you can find in the mapping, a lot of tools that can serve you in the process of collecting data. So you have there some examples on how to conduct interviews. You have in the guide tables where can help you to better list indicators and data sources. You have visualizations on and graphic models that you can use to list the actors in your ecosystem, and so on. There are many examples that can be used in this step, and we will go through some of them in the next slides.
Just to interject there, because there's a question from Yusuf saying, can we get some samples of implementing these steps? As you just said, these are available, and in fact, you're going through some as you go through.
Exactly. We will not be able to go through all of the tools that are presented, but we will go through some of them, and this will, of course, be practical examples of some information that is gathered according to what we mentioned before in step 1, where we mentioned a research design for green and inclusive businesses. And some of these examples will follow this. So I think they will be quite comprehensive, but if not, we can also discuss and try to see other examples that could be of relevance to you, of course. One aspect to take into account here, of course, is that, as I mentioned, this is the step that takes most time. This is the step that needs more effort from the incubator or the entrepreneur startup that is implementing it. And so there is, of course, the possibility and the risk of getting lost in all the information that is collected. So it is important to try to summarize as best as possible, to have a focus on what is being researched and collected, and so that we don't get lost in all the information that we find during this process. So as I mentioned, we will, in the next slide now, I think in the next slide, I don't know if it changed. Yes, in the next slide, we are now going in a little bit more detail in both the secondary data collection, that is the desk research, and then on the primary data collection, which includes the surveys, the interviews, and the focus groups. Of course, as we were mentioning before, it is important to collect data from different sources. And of course, starting with the desk research is the recommended procedure to take in this. Of course, as mentioned, there are different, when we're looking at desk research, there are many different sources of data. Douglas exemplified some that we can find for BIC Africa on very interesting reports that exist and that also help us to understand the ecosystem, as Douglas presented. And so there are many different sources of information, but there are some that can be used as a basis for collecting quantitative data and also to understanding and to trying to compare not only ecosystems, but specific situations and aspects regarding entrepreneurship in a specific region or a specific country. You will see there in the slide some examples of these reports, and some of them include very good information and relevant indicators. Such is the case of GEM, which can serve as a good example of a benchmarking report, actually, where you can get comparison of different data and different indicators for different countries and for different moments in time. So this is very important to understand how a specific, in this case, we're talking about GEM, talking about countries, so how the country situation in terms of entrepreneurial activity has been evolving throughout the years, and how does it compare with different countries from different regions, or countries from its own regions. So there are many aspects that can be considered when looking at these reports, and specifically within the GEM report, which includes very much relevant information for ecosystem mapping. So, yes, please. So in terms of some examples, we were talking here about benchmarking reports. So this is one of the tools that is presented in the guide. You will see here basically benchmarking information for the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. And here you will see that you have a proposition of a structure in a table format that you can use to summarize relevant information that you look for in specific reports. Here, the example shows what relevant data we could take from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. So you'll see that you have several lines for types of information that we want to collect. We want to collect what is the aim of this report. In this case, tracking the rates or of entrepreneurship across multiple phases. And what is the aim of this, adapted, of course, with the aim of our mapping. What is the methodology used in GEM? Douglas talked about this, so the survey and the National Expert Survey. Some examples of what can be relevant for us concern a specific program in Georgia that facilitated the inclusion of Georgia in a report. So this is an example of how the report was relevant for Georgia at the time. You can see there the number of, in the specific case of countries that we can compare the data with. So in this case, in 2017, there were 65 economies. In 2022, there were 50. So we'll see that there are many economies where we can compare data from. Then you can have the frequency of the report, when it is launched and when we can access this data, how it is done in terms of geographical coverage. In this case, it's done, as I mentioned, at the national level. And then you have a section which we believe it's very relevant when you are trying to summarize benchmarking reports and other reports that provide relevant information on certain countries or certain indicators, is that you will have a section on pros and cons of the specific source of information, in this case, GEM. You will see there the example that GEM works, of course, with primary data collection in all countries that it focuses on. It has a clear focus on entrepreneurship, and it is a data source that exists since more than 20 years. So you will have a lot of data to base your work in. Of course, there are some cons against it. There are national teams in GEM. Then some cases, the national teams and information about national countries is not available every year, so that can be a con. So, but these are just some examples of how we can structure the information we are collecting and how we can put it in a nice way to try to summarize other benchmarking and relevant examples. If we move to the next slide, you will see other tools, but here not as much related with benchmarking qualitative information, but rather relevant indicators and data sources from different sources. You will see here, and in the guide, there is a very comprehensive section with several tools and examples of what you can try to summarize through different indicators. You'll see there on the left, for example, that the guide shows an example of how we can define access to finance and how we can find relevant indicators related with access to finance in a specific country or region. So you see there in the indicator, we talk about, for example, ease of getting credit, and the source where you can get that information from, it's the Doing Business report, and you have there the link that is easily accessible in the guide. Or, for example, if you want to know aspects concerning the domestic credit to private sector by banks, you can go to the World Bank Development Indicator Database, and they have this information. So this is another example of how you can structure the information, where you can get relevant information from the different indicators, in this case, that relate with access to finance, and a structure that you can adopt to include that information throughout the years. There is also other examples in the guide, as I mentioned, not only concerning business environment, but you have there other examples. For example, in terms of entrepreneurial culture and attitude, they are included 3 variables that come from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor report, and that you can take a look and, of course, include and use for understanding and mapping your ecosystem, understanding, for example, how the entrepreneurial culture and attitude has been evolving in different countries or in different regions throughout a certain period of time. So it is important, again, the message is to summarize and to use efficient tools to summarize information concerning relevant indicators and relevant data sources. In the next slide, we will now move to primary data collection, surveys, focus groups, discussions, or interviews. Of course, I would say that probably, and we'll want to hear also from you that in the next slide, but probably you have used these methods before. So this is not something this is not rocket science. We are trying to summarize some good primary data collection methods that we use and that we, of course, believe are very relevant to define the ecosystem and to map this ecosystem. Again, these are not any very innovative or new or out of the box methodologies, but they are definitely very useful. So if we go first for the semi-structured interviews, of course, here we are talking about interviews with with the help of a questionnaire, with open questions that are useful mainly to collect people's opinions and experiences. And something that is very interesting in this guide is that you are able to see some examples of interview questions that you might use to define the ecosystem. Some questions that are included in the guide are, for example, how would you assess the general regulatory environment for entrepreneurs? What do you consider as the main challenge to entrepreneurs to register businesses? How is the legal framework and procedures that can influence entrepreneurship? So the guide provides several examples of what can be an interview guide to be used and to be applied during the mapping process, which is, of course, very, very interesting and can serve as a good basis for developing your own questionnaires. The second data collection method proposed are the focus group discussions. These, of course, are a little bit more, take a little bit more effort than the interviews, but they consist, of course, of gathering a small group of people to have a moderated discussion and collecting in-depth information on a specific topic. Sometimes this focus group has no particular knowledge on the topic. Sometimes we can involve people that are experienced in the thematic. And so it allows us to go a little bit, to go in a direction that is a little bit different than the interviews and also the survey that I will explain later. So in terms of the survey, this is the last method that is presented in the guide. Of course, it's very relevant to try to collect information from a large number of people. We can pose several questions. It provides us with statistically robust data on a specific topic. And of course, it helps us to collect the information from several people on their perception, in this case, on the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Some good examples of where a survey is used to define and to understand the entrepreneurial ecosystem are, of course, as we mentioned, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor Adult Population Survey. Okay, so this is a good example of a survey that is used yearly of at least 2,000 people per country, and where it is tried to measure the entrepreneurial attitudes and activities that are ongoing in the country. So these are good examples, not only the GEM example, but you can also see on the slide, we talk about the World Bank's Enterprise Survey. These are two good examples of surveys that are applied and that target the need to map and try to understand the ecosystem by the view of an entrepreneur or by an enterprise that's trying to develop their business. So as I mentioned, these are some examples of methodologies used. These are, of course, any institution, incubator, person, or entrepreneur that is developing this mapping is free to choose the combination of the tools that they want to use as they feel best and that they feel that it fits better the ecosystem they are analyzing. But of course, these are relevant examples. Again, in the guide, you can find not only examples of semi-structured questions for the interviews, but also examples of aspects that you should consider for moderating discussions on focus groups. Also, some questions that you need to consider for providing survey questionnaires to a large number of people. So again, we invite you to take a look at that and see the specific tools and examples that are shown there, that unfortunately will not be able to show everything here today, but maybe you can access it later. So after showing, after showing all of these examples, and as I mentioned before, probably you have used it in the past or are using it for a specific project or analysis, we want to understand from you what data collection methods have you used or are you using the most to map your ecosystem, in case you are. We have, and I will share. Yes, you can. Yes, of course. I will share just on the chat, if that's okay, the link as well for you to get this. And I will ask Douglas if I can share the screen now. Thank you. Exactly. So we will be looking at some of the results now in full screen. You can answer more than one. And of course, there might be other methodologies that you have used besides this that can be of relevance. And of course, if you have done it, please write it in the chat and we can, of course, discuss it. But for now, let's wait a few minutes for the answers, but we're having more survey people rather than the others. Interesting. Okay, we are collecting just some other answers. Again, as mentioned, every one of these techniques has its own pros and cons. And the combination of several ones, we would say it's the most efficient in some cases. Really depends again. Okay, we'll just give 10 more seconds to people to answer if they want. Okay. Exactly. It seems the survey is definitely the most voted one. And this is quite interesting because the survey, I would say, is the option that allows us to collect information from most individuals, because in comparison specifically with interviews and focus group discussions, because we can have statistically robust data to collect from, but can also be very demanding in terms of effort, because we will need, again, to collect information from rather big sample, or at least higher than, for example, the focus group discussions and interviews. But it's definitely the one that can be potentially more reliable in terms of data and quantitative data that it can provide on specific indicators. So this is very relevant to understand that from the answers provided, 82% have used or are using survey to map the ecosystem, which is very interesting. Also, the second placed one is the desk research, which also makes sense. It's probably, as we were discussing at the beginning, the one that should be done first to have an overall sense of how the ecosystem is positioned. And it's, of course, more accessible because we can just use, of course, online tools to search for this information on available documents online, provide very good inputs on what we want to further understand. So yes, it's one of the methods that I would say it's the most immediate method that can be used as a starting point, mainly to have an overview of the ecosystem. Of course, if we want to get more into detail, as other types of data collection, such as, of course, the survey, the interview, the focus group discussion, these types of data collection methods provide more specific information and go also more in line with the objectives that we have defined, for example, in step 1. So this is very interesting, because maybe I will stop sharing and I would move to the second part of the presentation. And thank you very much, everyone, for replying to this quick poll. But we will now move to the second part, where we will define the 3 steps after collecting the data. Of course, after we have gone through this process, which, as I mentioned, is the step that would take more time, we would need to analyze the data that we have collected. Of course, this can be done in several ways using several assumptions, but what is suggested in this guide, which we believe it's a very interesting approach, is to analyze the data based on the three elements of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, those that were presented at the beginning of this presentation, and try to define this data according to these elements. So the three elements are mentioned there are the business environment and investment climate. Try to analyze the data according to the actors that you are trying to identify in your mapping, and also according to the entrepreneurial culture and attitude of the ecosystem. After doing this, trying to summarize the observations that you have taken from this exercise. So very quickly, the goal of this step is to use the data to formulate a series of hypotheses about the ecosystem. And this will, of course, serve as the basis for your decision-making in the further steps. Of course, you have already collected the data in the step before, so this should take around 5 days to a week to complete. And there are several tools that can be used. We will go through some examples of them, but you can, of course, check them in detail and additional ones that are not going to be presented here in the guide. Of course, what you can see when you are developing this step is that maybe some information that you wanted to collect is missing. We suggest that we can, of course, go back a step or two if needed to either collect more information or to redo the research design framework that we originally provided. So it is fine for us to do so if we think that something might be missing from our analysis. Okay. Having said that, we will go into the next slide where we try to analyze the data from a business environment and investment climate perspective. So as mentioned, this is one of the elements that is contextualized in this guide. And what you can see from this slide is an example of a scorecard that displays information on the general trends according to benchmarking reports and the information that was collected in step 2. So when you reach the data analysis part, of course, you'll have data from different sources. Either they are interviews, focus groups or surveys, or data that you collect from the desk research you have developed. And specifically, we have shown the examples of some benchmarking reports where you can collect data from. So you will try to either rank this data, as you will see, and try to get the most relevant comparative results and comparison among years, different years, and also different countries or regions, although it's not shown there in the example scorecard in the table. But you will see that this is an example of the type of analysis that you can make. So you are looking at the global competitiveness report, for example, seeing a specific economy, a specific country. How is it ranked in 2015? How was it ranked in the year before? What are the changes from this year? Is the country, region, or city evolving in terms of its competitiveness, in terms of its entrepreneurial activity? If we think of GEM, it's for example not shown on the slide. How is it in terms of its innovation through the Global Innovation Index? Has it been increasing or not? So these are some tools and methodologies that can be used that can help us to understand the specific context, the specific ecosystem, according to some indicators that we have identified and data that we have collected, and try to understand how it is evolving throughout the years or how it is compared with other countries and regions. The second element that we need to take into consideration when analyzing data is the actors. So here we want to identify, of course, as we mentioned at the beginning, relevant actors in an ecosystem. This can be done, of course, in many different ways. what the guide proposes, and which we think is very interesting, is to try to summarize this information by using different visualization methods. In the slide, you can see two examples that provide some visualization of actors. And these are two very different approaches, as you can see. One of them, the one to the left, is an ecosystem visualization according to capacity works. This is a method also developed by GIZ. And here you can see that we are trying to understand what actors exist for small and growing businesses in a specific capital city. Having said this, we will try to define what are the primary actors. So basically, this scheme defines the primary and secondary actors according to the target group that was, in this case, exemplified in our map, in this case, small and growing businesses in capital city. So we will have, according to this, and the primary actors, who are the primary actors in finance for our ecosystem. You'll see there's some examples. What are the primary actors for support services? Are there incubators there? What are the incubators? Is there an association associated with this topic? At the policy level, the primary actors. At the city level, what are the investments that are related with small and growing businesses, and so on. So these are some examples of what, and of course, general, because these are just examples, but this shows what type of actors and what type of exercise we want to do when defining our actors according to the methodology. You will also have secondary actors that, of course, impact your ecosystem and your activity, but are not the primary impactors, so to say, of your entrepreneurial ecosystem. You'll see there's some examples on the finance, in this case for crowdfunding platforms, on the policies, maybe at the regional level, there might be some policy bodies and economic aspects that need to be taken into account. So this is an example, and it has many advantages, of course. This is more, I would say, described and descriptive than potentially other visualization methods. It has the qualitative elements in the visualization. You can include more information there if needed in terms of the collaboration that you are taking from each actor if required. And so this is, I would say, a very comprehensive method of visualizing your actors. Of course, this list of factors might take a lot from you in terms of effort for filtering what actors are relevant according to these categories, but we think it's a very comprehensive method on how to visualize your targets. A second one, which is completely different from this one that I just described, is to try to see what are the actors that are relevant to you distributed by region. This is another important method to understand the geographical distribution of the actors. Of course, it shows if there are any regional disparities in terms of service providers, what regions need to be more supported or improved in terms of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, analyze what are the specific needs of the region. And so it shows the actor distribution more geographically oriented. Of course, it has some disadvantages when compared, for example, with the visualization we showed before, which it only compiles a small amount of information, has no qualitative element. And so, of course, there might be some disadvantages, but this can be shown, and it has, of course, its own objective and purpose. The third element in the next slide that we'll be showing concerns, of course, entrepreneurial culture and attitude. And very quickly, so here, as mentioned before, when we are talking about the context of the guide, it is important to capture the entrepreneurial culture and the entrepreneurial attitude through both qualitative primary information and quantitative data. One example that is provided is to try to measure this entrepreneurial culture and attitude by using and by comparing this perspective with other countries. And one study, of course, that provides very good information, as I mentioned, on entrepreneurial culture and attitude is the GEM report. So it has specific indicators on this, on how a specific country is doing in terms of its culture related with entrepreneurship, the attitude of people towards entrepreneurship. And so we would invite, of course, everyone that is interested in take a look on the GEM report and see what are the indicators mentioned there concerning the entrepreneurial culture and attitude. This is an example of how to visualize this and how to show this analysis. And finally, the next slide, we would have the summary of what we just analyzed. Again, very quickly, here the idea is that we formulate different hypotheses and cluster them into the 3 elements that are shown there and that we just described, based on the data that we collected in step 2 and the data that we have analyzed in step 3. So try to organize and summarize this information according to 3 elements. And of course, formulate this, we suggest in bullet points and in a concise format. You have in the guide an example of how this can be done. Moving to step 4, after we collect the data and we analyze it, it is important, and we think this is a very important step, is to validate the data that we just analyzed. And this can be done either internally through the people that are working with us, or the actors that we end up involving, for example, in the step 2 of collecting data. And this can, of course, show some things that maybe we have missed or mistakes that we have done during our analysis, also to validate some of the findings that we have found. And so this is a very good way to also get new input to the mapping exercise that we are doing. Usually, and the 2 main ways to get this data validated is either by writing, so we would share the conclusions with relevant stakeholders and asking for comments, or you can use and develop a workshop to present these findings to other stakeholders and also to other colleagues within your institution. So as mentioned, the main goal would be to have these results verified by other experts. This should take around 2 days, we would say, to develop this. Of course, in terms of the workshop preparation, this would take a little bit more time, but in terms of the implementation, this will take around 2 days. There are some tools and examples in the guide for having a checklist and presenting the different hypotheses. You can check them. And of course, it's always the challenge here is try to be sensitive with the presentation of the results. There might be, of course, some confidential information or information that we have collected from some sources that don't want it to be presented in the way that we can present it. So it's trying to have attention to that. And of course, having the capacity to understand that maybe we have gone the wrong road in some aspects and we need to adapt what we have done. We need to redo some of the analysis we have done. So that might occur. And it's of course an improvement of what we are doing. Very quickly to the next slide, validation in writing. Of course, this is very straightforward, trying to summarize what we have encountered in a PowerPoint slide, share this as much as possible through visualizations, and you have examples in the guide, with potential experts that are relevant in the specific topic or ecosystem. This is important, who to send it. The number of people should not be too small, where you want to send, of course, the conclusions, as not everyone has time to comment, of course, and the feedback should be used to define our interventions on the supporting of the ecosystem and the mapping of the ecosystem. The next slide. Then, of course, the workshop, this is more, the disadvantage of this is that it's more costly, of course, and time consuming, but it has many other advantages in our view specifically. And we are very much in favor of doing this when we do exercises of mapping an ecosystem, mapping a specific thematic, we always like to conduct workshops to validate this information. So who should we invite? People that, of course, we have involved in the previous steps, maybe stakeholders we have interviewed, partners, and so on. And of course, the main benefits of this is that we have the opportunity to discuss the findings with the people in person, to receive feedback from them on the spot. It allows, of course, for us to discuss potential amendments or adjustments with the people that we are interacting during the workshop. And of course, another important thing is the collaboration. So when you are mapping an ecosystem and you are already interacting with its experts, either by interviews, focus groups, and so on, now you have also the chance to have a workshop to discuss with them in person. So already building the community and building the ecosystem, being involved in this ecosystem. So having said that, once you have validated the data, you can go to the activity. So the outcome of this mapping exercise. And this can be used in a variety of ways. This is, of course, dependent on the entity or person or other types of institutions that are developing the mapping. But there are here some examples, and the guys show some examples of how you can use these results. Of course, first, you can use it for better stakeholder collaboration. I just discussed this, for example, in the validation workshop. You can do this to develop a strategy to promote entrepreneurship in your ecosystem. You can do this to design interventions in case, for example, you are developing a specific program for related with entrepreneurship ecosystem. You can design these interventions. And of course, to understand and to monitor the changes that can occur in the landscape. So very quickly, the goal to make of this step, to make use of the mapping results as better as possible. In terms of timing, this should take around, or more, I would say, more than a week, because it's the conclusions that we are taking from the whole exercise that we have done. There are several tools that you can check. Those are some examples there as well that you can check on the guide. And of course, there needs, what can go wrong here is that these results need to be internalized by the institution. And sometimes this mapping counts with the collaboration from external experts. So it's important that whatever the outcome is, it is implemented in the institution or the startup or the organization that has developed the mapping. Again, trying to be efficient. In the next slide, you will see just some quick descriptions of these 4 examples of the outcomes that you can take. Of course, better stakeholder collaboration. You want, as I mentioned, you have interacted with different stakeholders. You have discovered many things through this exchange. So this can be a starting point for a long-term collaboration, a long-term dialogue with the stakeholders from the ecosystem. And of course, this is something, a very important, I would say, outcome of this process. The second is to develop a strategy for entrepreneurship promotion. So this can also serve, this mapping, a starting point for developing such a strategy. The guide talks about 2 main success factors for developing such strategy. First, build on reliable information, which probably you have done it if you followed the 5 steps that were presented. And developing collaboration with the ecosystem players. Again, involving the ecosystem, involving the actors and the players is of key relevance for the mapping process. Some examples are also presented there on the slide and are accessed in the guide. Next slide. The third outcome that can be done concerns the design of the own interventions. So, of course, the main reason to map is to try to understand how can our program interventions, if that's the case, be utilized and how they can be implemented. So one suggestion by the guide, and this is very important in the structure, is that you have there a matrix that shows one way that can be used to try to summarize these potential interventions. First, to define what are the challenges according to the different elements. You will see here that we are defining challenges and interventions according to the element of business environment and investment climate as defined in the guide. You can do that also for the actors and for the entrepreneurial culture and attitude. And some examples are presented, of course, in this guide. But so you take up a challenge that you have identified during the process, and you set a goal that you want to achieve through the addressing that challenge. And through that, you will conclude by proposing a set of possible interventions that you can take to address these challenges and to achieve the goals. So you have there an example of some of the conclusions and some interventions that can be taken by the entrepreneurial mapping entity or person that is developing and that wants to develop a set of interventions. So in the guide, you have further examples of how you can design this and some best practices on this as well. So in the next slide, finally, another important point, of course, is to monitor the changes in the ecosystem. You have done a very detailed exercise of collecting information, understanding how the performance of the indicators is ongoing, how we are focusing on business, on different aspects of the business. And so you want to continue to doing that. And if that is possible, to continue to update those indicators and that information on a yearly basis. And so here the guide presents some examples of performance indicators that you can continue to monitor throughout time, even after you have developed this initial mapping exercise, and that can help you in understanding how the ecosystem is evolving. So this is the next slide. This is all from the 5 steps. I talked a lot about different tools, different examples. Again, I would highlight this again. Go to the guide to understand and to try to find new tools that I haven't presented here, but that are available in the guide. So we think this is a very interesting basis for you to start mapping the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So again, we'd like to highlight this, that the guide is a good database of tools and examples to do this. The second point that we would like to highlight is that each step needs to be adapted. So we talked about here examples and some potential best practices, but it really depends. It really depends on the objective of your mapping. It really depends on the context, either it is the sector, the regions, or the needs of your institution for developing the mapping. And so adaptations to these steps are recommended, and this needs to be done in accordance, again, with the objectives that you have defined. This is, again, as mentioned, the mapping exercise acts as a good basis for trying to observe, try to put it in a visualized way, how the entrepreneurial ecosystem is organized. And so we think it's relevant to go through that, to see the different propositions of methods, visualization, graphics that you can use. And this is very relevant for sometimes to understand if we think, for example, about the actors, about specific target groups that sometimes we might not be considering for the ecosystem, and we can by utilizing these tools. Of course, there might be other tools, other methodologies that can be used. The guide is a living document, so of course, take it as basis, but please add things and adapt according to a context. Again, it's very important. Now, after presenting the guide, we have just very few slides. My apologies if we have been taking some more time for that, but we wanted just to have 2 or 3 slides on a note coming from this exercise of mapping the ecosystem to moving to a place where you want to help building the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we want to make just a short introduction. So of course, using the results and leveraging on what was done during the mapping to build an ecosystem. Again,
this is very much related with the partnerships. You are seeing that on the slides with national and international stakeholders. Again, as I mentioned, the importance of the context of the network, of getting with the right people and the right institutions of the ecosystem is of key importance. Always take into consideration what is most useful for the entrepreneurs. So adopting a bottom-up approach to understanding what they need and what they need in relation to the ecosystem, and having in mind, of course, the competitive landscape in the ecosystem. We have done this in the mapping, as you might recall, when we talk about our targets, but we should also consider the competitiveness and the competitors that exist in the ecosystem. Of course, this section draws on materials, as Douglas mentioned, that we have been using, that have been developed by BIC Africa. In specific, these ones have been developed by Catherine Delavoye from Technoport in Luxembourg. And so, again, we would advise to go to the BIC Africa website and see some of the contents that are included there. Just a few more notes on focusing on complementarity and follow-up activities to go through when we think about your work as incubators, the life cycle of incubatees, from incubation, from the creation of idea, and also the acceleration of services. So this is very important. Of course, the acceleration as a way to scale up, but the importance of complementing the different actions that exist, and the incubators and accelerators, their role in building up the ecosystem. In the next slide, we would also, yes, please. The next slide, you will also, another point that we wanted to highlight in ecosystem building is that it is of key importance to cover the whole value chain. So what you see there on the slide, although it's a little bit blurry, hope you can read it, but this is an example of a value chain of agricultural products, which involves resources, raw materials, producers, traders, and clients, and so on. So it is important to consider the whole value chain of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, or specifically of the entrepreneurs that are part of your incubator or accelerator, and try to put them together with the whole value chain. And what happens is that, as shown in the next slide, is that it makes them more profitable at the end, because they have, if they are involved in this value chain, if the incubator is able to address and involve this whole value chain, it makes the incubatees more profitable and more sustainable, because they have an easier path to the market. So this is just picking up an example again of the agriculture products ecosystem, from the input supplier to the farmer, to the processor, to the trader, and then to the market. So if we are including this whole value chain and involving this whole value chain when we are building the ecosystem, it's much better to give them access, give incubatees, entrepreneurs access to these services in a more easy way, and in terms also in a way that they can have a trust collaboration and business collaboration, of course, with the rest of the ecosystem. Of course, being an entrepreneur, it's a challenge, because in some cases the ecosystem is not mature enough. But again, the incubators and accelerators can and should support in this process of the involvement of the whole value chain for the entrepreneurs. So this was actually my last slide. Of course, I don't know if there were any questions in the meantime in the chat box.
There were some requests for further information, but we've answered those by identifying that the slides, of course, will be available, but the guide is of course available on both from the link on the GIZ site, which of course is where they is the original author, but it's also been put onto the BIC Africa site as well. And actually, I mean, we're quite happy, Francisco and I are quite happy to receive questions after this these sessions today. If you have any questions, then please do find, we'll make sure that at the end we give our emails out. We're very happy to interact as we go through, as we go through the 4 sessions on over the next few weeks. So if you have any specific questions, then of course we'll be very happy to react to you with no issues at all. But there were no specific questions concerning the content.
Good.
I see that we have Christina and Dawit on screen as well. We've now reached the end of part C, and we're actually within 4 minutes of being on time, which is, I think, very good. Thank you so much for everyone again and for all your inputs. But Christina, I would suggest we have slightly longer break this time, maybe even to the hour, 25. I don't want, I'm conscious that of course people might want to have something, some quick relief, something to eat or whatever. But Christina, over to you, whether in whatever time you think is relevant. We're happy to have, say, a 20-minute break until 5 to the hour, or a 25-minute break until the hour, as people prefer.
Yes, okay. Thanks a lot, Douglas. So again, just to emphasize, indeed, we will be sharing the slides and also the recording after this session this week. Also, please feel free to access the resources part on our website. So we have also our newsletters and various different materials and reports accessible there. And Douglas, so returning to your question, indeed, I think it's good to have a break. So maybe we can schedule to start again. Indeed, so it would be 5 p.m. Eastern African time. Maybe we can gather already 5 minutes before that, 5 minutes before the hour, and then start sharply at 5 p.m. if it's okay with you to stick to 1 hour and finish at 6.
That's absolutely perfect for us. So we'll be back. We'll be back online 5 minutes before the hour and start on the hour. Fantastic.
Okay, thanks a lot. So see you all in 20-25 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Welcome back.
You can you can hear me, Christina?
Yeah.
So we've got a few more minutes.
Yeah, we'll be starting in 5 minutes.
Cool. Christina, do you think we should start? I think we've just got to the hour.
Yes, I think so. I think you can start. Thank you.
Fantastic. And just to confirm, everyone can hear me, yes. Excellent.
Yes.
So thank you again for coming back. I mean, we know that everyone is very busy these days, and that and that it's the last session of obviously quite a quite a long, at least half day. So we really thank you very much for returning to us. Very happy indeed about that. We are in this last part. We're trying to focus a little bit more on mentoring programs, and we'll explain a bit more what we mean there. But really, the focus of how an incubator or a support organization can implement a mentoring program. Just trying to offer some practical tips. We're trying to make this session as practical as possible, because obviously, as we said, we know it's the last session of a tiring half day. So we have also included I think three sort of questions for interaction as we go through, so that it can help us in identifying the key aspects and the key points about what we want to do within this mentoring, the idea of a mentoring program. Again, thank you for all the participants coming back. Please do put any questions in the chat. As you can see, Francisco and I are operating jointly. So as soon as a question comes through, we can answer it immediately and ensure that everyone else can understand the answer which we would like to give. Fantastic. So if that's the case, let me start just with a bit of sort of information about, well, what are we talking about? What is a mentoring program? There are a few aspects which I think are quite clear. It's a structured initiative that pairs mentors, experienced individuals, with potentially less experienced individuals, the mentees, the entrepreneurs, the owners of the new businesses. Incubators and support organizations have a role to play here in determining and identifying and implementing such mentoring programs or mentoring relationships. They are very flexible. There's very many models of this. Hopefully we can go into a few of those and just discuss sort of practically how they can be implemented. One of the reasons why we wanted to discuss this just now is it's actually one of the first things that often an incubator or support organization starts with to provide or to structure a mentoring program. Sometimes it can be done at a relatively low cost. It can have a relatively good, strong, immediate impact, and can also be used as we'll see later in terms of communication. For instance, it can also be used to communicate the incubator's activities and really get the incubator focused and well known within the country's ecosystem. So fantastic. In terms of the material which we're going to present and discuss in the next 45 minutes or so, again, it draws on material which myself and two other colleagues, Arnaud Catinol and Axel Viam, we're developing under the BIC Africa. We implemented already a sort of a longer training course or longer course on this within Ethiopia, and it's culminating in this is what's shown here as this guidebook on mentoring startups by BIC Africa. That is not yet published. It's hopefully in the final elements of being commented and then it can be published on the BIC Africa website. This is what it currently looks like, and of course it's trying to be practical and relatively short, 12, 15, 18 pages. It's not a long textbook in any way, setting out a few aspects, in this case in Ethiopia, but I think we can extend it. It can be extended, I think, to the other countries in BIC Africa. A few aspects about how to set up and develop and implement mentoring programs in here for startups, for entrepreneurs, for new business. We were developing it in October 2023. It's nearly ready for publication. I'm very happy to once it is published to have all comments available, because we really want to try to make it as practical as possible. Excellent. So in terms of perhaps some terminology that we're going to use here, We're continually splitting into three sets of terminology here. The mentor, the experienced individual who provides mentoring to the mentee. The mentee, the individual who receives the mentoring to better perform their entrepreneurship journey, we phrased it here. And the incubator, of course, we use the word incubator. Of course, you know, there's other terminology that can be used, but the structure that sets and runs the mentoring program. So we're talking here about structured programs for one or more new entrepreneurs and one or more mentors, in which that mentor and mentee, they can get together, they go through a selection process, go through a confirmation process, go through an agreement process, and that agreement process is something which we'll come back to practically ensure that this relationship works, or has the best chance possible to work. Of course, we understand that sometimes, even with the best laid plans, the mentor-mentee relationship perhaps is not as positive or as functioning as one had hoped. But then, of course, the case there is the option there is to learn from that and improve next time that you want to implement such a relationship. Okay, again, please do put any comments. Please do put any comments in the chat. But what I think we would like to do first of all is actually go straight to a question. So, from the point of view of an incubator, it's interesting, I think, for us to think about, well, why would an incubator or a support organization implement a mentoring program? Remember, mentoring program in the widest sense. You could see in the comments, in the chat, that we've put the link to the QR. It's if you could please select perhaps the three most interesting or the three most relevant, do you think? But of course, this is a flexible process. Please do as you prefer. If there's only one which is interesting, or more than three, but of course there's no problem with that at all. There's a comment earlier about the framework. When we were talking about challenges and framework framework challenges, that perhaps it would be nice to have a question in which people could rank the most relevant. And I think, again, we'll make sure that after this session is over, we'll also send such a slide out to people so that people can do that as well. But in this case, and maybe I'll stop sharing and we can go to your screen, Francisco. In this case, the idea is just to identify which ones are the most relevant so far. And the idea, of course, is what are the objectives of a mentoring program run by the incubator, from the incubator's point of view or from your point of view. Yeah, a few people answering. The more the merrier. It would be good if possible. Maybe give another 20 or 30 seconds or so more people could put their points of view. Although there's some clear, I think there's some clear aspects being highlighted, and some interesting ones as well. Again, not necessarily the ones which we've seen before. I think skill development is obviously the one which I think a lot of people will generally focus on. But this point about networking, I think, is very interesting indeed. When we talk to mentors and the mentees, in fact, and talking about what are the gains, what are they gaining out of these relationships? Networking does come up quite a lot, but it's for the mentor, both on the mentor and the mentees. Mentor and mentee side. That's a very interesting point. I think that the mentee, the new entrepreneur, the new business owner, very much likes to be put in through the mentor's contacts, put in contact with other organizations, other people within the ecosystem. But that works both ways around. The mentor also has a very strong positive attitude and positive output from this. Learning and fresh perspectives I think is a great one. Leadership development, absolutely. I think that here when we've been discussing the implementation of mentoring and programs and how they've got that the mentee really values mentors who can show how the mentee themselves can improve their leadership opportunities. I think that's a very key aspect indeed. And when we're thinking about a mentorship program, the relationship to mentor and mentee, it's not about the mentor training the mentee in a sense. It's not about the mentor saying this is what you have to do. It's not about the mentor making decisions about the new company. More, it's about the mentee being able to ask questions, being able to learn from the experience, being able to understand and gain access to the network of the mentor. So I really think we've got some good answers here. Very, very interesting indeed. Very interesting indeed. Skill development, networking, learning, leadership, and then personal fulfillment and giving back. I think very much from the case of the mentors, that's very important indeed. And maybe we'll just go into that in the next couple of slides or so. Excellent. I think we're all done with that. Very interesting examples indeed. Oh, I should mention when we provide the slides from this from the sessions today, of course, what we'll do is make sure that we update them to include the results of these polls and these questions. Excellent. So maybe if we can switch back to my screen. Yes, sure. Okay. A second. Okay. So that was a question. Thank you so much for answering that. So in terms of then implementing a mentoring program, one of the first aspects is to identify and find mentors. Of course, then you have to go into a matching process. I did mention at the start, but I would like to emphasize that within BIC Africa, we've actually implemented a 2-day course or 2-day training in this idea of implementing a mentoring program. And of course, if that's of interest to people, then we can think about how to do that within the upcoming session, say next year or so, to implement a specialist session on mentoring if that's of interest. But what are the most common sources of mentors for incubators? And indeed, they're partnering and sponsoring organizations because funding has to come from somewhere. Now we've got a list of these, and I think depending on circumstances, some are more relevant than others. And I don't think we've got this in fact in order of any particular order in terms of level of importance. Of course, when mentors come from government agencies and NGOs, especially in certain types of industries and certain types of sectors, they can come from universities and colleges as well. They can come from service providers, consulting firms, accounting firms, law firms, especially if, say, the entrepreneur is looking for a specific type of mentorship. Maybe they're looking for mentorship in how to set up the legal nature of their company, or the accounting nature of their company, or the governance of their company in total. And sometimes service providers would be useful there. Sometimes also mentors can come from banks, from equity funds, etc. Especially there, of course, one is looking for mentors in how to identify and access new funding sources. Most come from local business and corporations in our experience. Most of the mentors are experienced business people within the sector or outside of the sector, the advantages and disadvantages of both, but experienced business people who have more likely been entrepreneurs before as well. So entrepreneurs within their organization, physically an entrepreneurial within a large organization, or for themselves. And that type of experience is so valued by mentees. It's so valued by new entrepreneurs. In the same way as organizations for special types of groups, engineers, associations, retired executives is another one in which there is a very good match often between the availability of the mentor, the capacity of the mentor, the understanding of the mentor, the ability of the mentor to pass on information, but if they've done it for many years. So retired executives is one source in which is one source in which is very important and very relevant indeed. Then you have professional volunteers, and then you have then you have CEOs and senior people from young dynamic companies, people who are almost who are still doing their entrepreneurship activities. And of course, there are advantages and disadvantages there as well, whether they have enough time, what their levels of experience are. But there's really something that is valued by someone who's got this immediate understanding and relevance and experience, this immediate experience of being a senior person in a young dynamic company. So we find our mentors, when we're implementing mentoring schemes, we find our mentors tend to come from these types of organizations. But I would highlight, of course, retired executives, local businesses, new young companies who have been successful and want to be involved. The other sources, I think, are more focused. I mean, sometimes universities, for instance, if it's a technology type mentorship that is wanted, financing sources or etc. If someone is more focused on trying to find funds, as for instance, as we're going to go through in session 3 and 4 later in early December. Excellent. So I wanted to then come back to, well, this is two-sided. This is mainly why do how to source mentors. But then the idea is, well, why are mentors interested in becoming mentors, in providing their time, providing their resources, providing providing their experience to normally younger, not necessarily always younger, but normally younger mentees. So we did want to get your opinion about that and about why do mentors engage in the mentoring program. And let me put a rather self-centered reason for asking this question is that, as I said, we're still developing the guidebook, which I mentioned before. The more and this information which we're getting through the questions means that we can target it better, for instance, to the BIC Africa or BIC Africa countries and Africa as a continent. So I really appreciate it if you could answer this question, because we gain significantly for that, and see if we can make sure that we better target this guidebook in its final format. So the question is, why do mentors engage in a mentoring program? Again, it's a word cloud idea, so please just perhaps if you could mention a few words as you go through. I'll stop sharing, and maybe we can include them. As I said, just a few words here and there would be very useful indeed, and I think help populate our next half an hour or so. I don't see anyone typing at the moment. Ah, here we go. Excellent. Thank you. Brilliant. So, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we'll wait for a little bit longer. Please do keep on typing. Of course, if you're finding words or phrases that people have already written you agree with, then retype them in, because that, of course, increases their importance within the word cloud. Still have one or two more people typing. I think one person typing, so we'll wait for a few more seconds, and then we can go through these. Again, thank you so much for helping us by interacting in these polls. Excellent. We have one more participant typing. Excellent. So knowledge transfer and networking, I think, are the best, are the ones which have been most identified. You know, I'm going to make another point here, because one of the issues which mentoring programs have, or when you're implementing a mentoring program, is of course attracting good mentors, and it's very important then that the individual mentors, the type of mentors we're trying to target, you target them. They are targeted with the correct type of approach, with the correct type of benefits for them, to highlight the benefits for them, as well as, you know, as well as for the other people within this sort of three-way relationship between the incubator, the mentor, and the mentee. So these are very interesting indeed. Knowledge transfer and networking. I think networking is very clear. It's whenever we talk now to more and more mentors, they see it as a way of entering into the network, expanding their ecosystem, expanding both their knowledge transfer, both the knowledge transfer from them to the mentee, but the mentee's knowledge transfer to them. Many times mentors are operating in a sector which is of interest to them, or rather they're mentoring in a sector which is interesting to them, but which their original business sector or their business knowledge wasn't focused on, which wasn't focused. And so it's entering into using the knowledge transfer back to them, and the networking for this type of symbiotic relationship to improve their position as well. Increased engagement, leadership growth, supporting others as well. This idea of giving back, social responsibility, giving back for guidance. Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a key aspect for mentors. They're building their brand. Yes, we have. Yeah, it's very, very useful to comprehend, to understand. But yes, of course, mentors benefit from this by potentially building their brand as well. Now, one sometimes needs to be careful to ensure that the rules of engagement, and we'll get into those in a little while, are set up so that people understand that this is a possibility. But there are, of course, limits, and there are ways in which it should be done through rules of engagement, through setting up everything. So, but to build their brand and investment, I think is very, very, very important indeed. To expand their networking, yes, absolutely. I think this is a very interesting set of words. Thank you so much for doing it. I think it gives us extra evidence. It will give us extra evidence for the guidebook. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, so maybe we can then move on. Thank you to the people who took the time to implement that. I will then share my screen again. Excellent. So, moving on. We thought it'd be useful in the slides to have some examples of why mentors engage, beyond or in addition or reiterating some of the points that you made. Psychological rewards, that's about giving back, etc. The long-standing commitment of a local community, absolutely. Again, it's giving back, and it's to the community, and perhaps giving back to the incubators which they perhaps have benefited from in the past, and to show that it's a vital part of the economic and social development. It may be that the mentors have a personal relationship with a member of the incubator team, and this again is something which we would focus on if you are running an incubator, or you are running an entrepreneurship support organization. But use your own personal networks to identify and prioritize and motivate mentors. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and it's to the benefit of all three parties in the relationship. In some cases, partnering organizations ask employees to engage in mentoring. So there are some there's some companies that can be involved in this, and maybe individual employees can act as mentors, and at the same time, brand awareness. This was about the brand, at the same time, gain public relations benefit, gain brand awareness for that particular mentoring organization, as well as contributing to the community. There are some cases in which, and the last two bullet points, which we haven't mentioned so far, this is also about building the rules of the game, building the rules of engagement. But sometimes the mentoring organization, like one, is aiming to make an investment in future businesses. through this sort of through this mentoring program. And as long as that's clear and upfront and transparent, and that's got very strong benefits to the incubator, to the mentee, to the mentor, and indeed to the community as a whole. And that could lead to even a position where the mentor and mentee have an equity position, have an equity agreement. Is sometimes when I've been involved in mentoring arrangements, it's focused on this idea of giving back to the community, or focus on helping to get into new ecosystems, for instance. But there is very clear, strong, and I think if well managed, opportunity for these mentoring arrangements, if they go very well, to lead into equity positions, to lead into investments, to lead into future business opportunities, with mentors and mentees working together. I think it's very important for that. Okay. Again, obviously, please do put questions in the chat if they come through. We'd like to ask one final question, and the final question is concerning this. Let me show. Should the incubator pay the mentors? I'm really interested in your points of view on this, because it's a big question, it's a sort of both a practical and an academic discussion about should the mentors be paid. In this case, should the incubators pay the mentors? And we set up a simple yes and no answer, because obviously if we were physically in a room, we would just put our hands up, we would just discuss it, we would make comments. But here I'd like to see what your experience is on whether or not incubators should be paid, so mentors should be paid by the incubators. And on the widest possible sense, we're not defining about what that payment should be in terms of values or how it should be implemented. Of course, that can be discussed in more detail in focus groups, but really, it's just a simple question. We would be very interested to know about whether you believe incubators or the sponsoring organizations, whether in effect mentors should be paid for their mentorship activities. Let me stop sharing and maybe we can show the screen. Interesting. I think there's still some people voting, so please do. And this is the last question. I think yes, you're right. This is the last question, but we've got so no worries about so there won't be any further questions. We're going to get into some aspects of the rules of engagement soon. Excellent. Thank you so much. So far it's a very interesting result here, because quite often we find it's when I've asked this question before, quite often it's more equal about paying or not paying, but it's more 50-50. Indeed, in many cases, the idea that the mentors should not be paid is answered more. It's very interesting, and I'd like to find out more about this when as we go through the different sessions. Okay, so maybe we'll move on. We've got about half an hour to go. Thank you so much for that. So overall, a large majority said yes, they should be, mentors could be paid, and rather than not paid. The next slide I have actually just goes through some reasons about perhaps why that could be the case. So we just wanted to put some information here for further discussion in the future. In terms of, for instance, I hope it's understandable what we've written here. Let's take the paying mode first, which is on the right hand side of the screen. The parts manageable presence and results in KPI, I think, are deemed as good reasons or positive reasons why one might want to pay the mentors. But the potentially more negative reasons are whether the mentor would then be motivated just by a contract, and of course we want them to be motivated by many different reasons. Sometimes there's a link between cost and quality. So if you're paying the mentor but not paying them that much, is that an indication? Or do they take that as an indication, but they don't have to invest much of their time or their quality into it? It also might mean limited action because of limits on the payments, and increase the mentee expectations here. So if the mentee understands that something is being paid for, then maybe their expectations are increased to an extent which is perhaps above what is reasonable. But it's interesting. There are pros and cons on each, and if you have a look at the free mode as well, again, in terms of the positive aspects, that motivation is based on willingness. It's based on it's based on the idea of whether that willingness is based on giving back to the community or getting involved in other ecosystems. It's quite often easier to manage because you don't have to keep KPIs or some aspects which are based on financial aspects. If you're not paid, then sometimes the mentor might feel more liberal in their discussion. However, if it's free, they might not put so much investment in ensuring that they turn up for meetings, and that there's more volatility for meetings. And perhaps they were thinking then, okay, more thinking about return on their time invested, and if that's, for instance, in terms of equity or investments or getting into new markets. And if that's not clear and upfront, then sometimes that can cause a problem as well. And we've got a couple of questions. Yeah. Yes. I can see them. Okay. The current level of mentoring awareness needs to be considered. Yes, I believe so. I think in terms of what I understand that question to be is when we're looking at identifying and selecting mentors, then yes, the awareness of both the mentor, but also what the mentoring, what the mentoring relationship should be is very important. We wanted just to do a sort of a highlights package in this hour or so, but we have, but the identifying, selection, and matching of mentors and mentees is very important, and there's some very interesting exercises which can be run on that indeed. And the second one, how can we assess the context of mentoring awareness or practice in the ecosystem? Well, yes, actually, when we were running this course in Ethiopia, something came up which I think is related to this, which I find very interesting, which is one of the incubators were identifying one of the ways which you could get understanding of the mentoring process and also attract mentors and indeed mentees, and financing and funding for any funding required, is to run a series of events in which the incubator in a hotel or whatever sets up an event of we want to understand and expand and identify a mentoring program, invite one or two people to speak at that, one or two local business leaders to speak, put on some nice drinks or some nice food, and get people to come in. And they found that that was a very good way of both attracting and raising awareness of mentoring and the possibilities, and also assessing where people were at already. Because if people came in and said, yes, I've mentored X, Y, and Z already, then of course that's a setting the context of mentoring or how practical it is in that ecosystem. I hope that's answered those two questions. Of course, please add questions if not. Okay. So in the final 20 minutes or so, we wanted to put a couple of practical things which of course we can make available. In particular, setting out the rules of engagement, and then a bit about communication. But in terms of setting out the rules of engagement, I mean, we need to be able to ensure that there are expectations placed on the mentor, the mentee, and the incubator, and indeed that they're known, they're transparent, and people sign up for them. So what is expected from the mentor? The mentor is expected to run to be able to run the mentorship sessions in a professional and positive way. They have to respect confidentiality of the information. Now, sometimes that requires an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, but most of the time it's more in a sort of just an overall agreement which we would like people to understand and in some cases sign up to, but not specifically an NDA. You've got the mentor, the time constraints and limitation. The mentor needs to, needs to ensure that the time constraints and limitations and the expertise of the mentor are respected. So not too much time is required, not too little time is required, and that it's clear. The mentor should understand, but well, this is going to be a monitored process, but the incubator will monitor the engagement, especially if it's done over a period of time. Now, of course, some mentoring engagements are done over a very short period, but some last for months or longer. In fact, I would say often the better ones last for months or longer. And I think it's important, but to know that this will be monitored, but but the impact will be assessed. And so to do that, both the mentor and the incubator manager, they need to achieve a clear understanding of the benefits to them, and the extent to which the incubator can deliver those benefits to the mentor itself, because the mentor of course has expectations. It may be, and it can be an ad hoc arrangement, or it can be a more formal arrangement. But again, it's about making it clear up front what it's going to be. Also, the identification of the frequency and the regularity of interactions is important, and it must be that during the process, that if the mentor has any complaints or any concerns, then they should make the incubator manager understanding of that. For instance, if they're underused or they're overused, or if there's issues with the relationship. So all of this is I think quite clear and quite understandable. And not particularly, I would say not particularly demanding in the sense of thinking about this. But the idea, of course, is to be as concise as possible within setting up the relationship, in this case with the mentor. So what is expected from the mentee, from the new incubator, sorry, from the new entrepreneur? Obviously, to be proactive, taking the initiative and responsibility for engaging the mentor. It's very important that the mentee takes that proactive role. The benefit focuses obviously on the mentee. The first benefit focuses on the mentee, and it's very important that they articulate their goals for the engagement. And we have a way in which we want to show this, and hopefully which is a simple way which can be implemented in incubators. They want to suggest ways that the mentor can help, but on the other hand, be willing to embrace new ideas. As mentors will get very demotivated very quickly if they believe they find that their advice or information, not that it's not being implemented, that's a different thing, but it's being completely ignored because the mentee is not open to new ideas. Obviously, one of the whole purposes is to have new ideas here. They should be sensitive to the mentor's time constraints. Mentors are obviously, sometimes they're mentoring more than one organization. Many of the best mentors are not retired executives. They've got their own work, their own jobs, their own companies to run, and indeed, all their own other elements to implement. So indeed, it's very important to be the mentees sensitive to their time constraints and show respect for their time and be committed to the process. Embracing new ideas and taking risks, of course, are similar things, but taking risks. But of course, it's the mentee that has to make the decisions about the decisions about their own company. It's not the mentor to make the decisions about the company. It's the mentee. So clearly, they have to take risks, but balance with sensitivity of the firm's value of culture, seeking guidance from other sources as well, and being responsible for the implementation, the decisions of the company, of the entrepreneurship venture. That's not the mentor's responsibility. Clearly, confidentiality needs to be respected, and indeed, the last two bullet points about discussing failures, communicating problems in a timely manner. There are three parties involved in this relationship, and it's very important that everyone is clear with each other. And then finally, in this idea, is what's expected from the incubator. So the incubator itself would be to oversee the mentorship program, making sure it runs smoothly, the needs of mentors and mentees are met, to provide support and enhance it and resources if needed. Maybe it's a location for the meeting, maybe it's some other aspects but both the mentor and the mentee would like to improve the mentorship experience. to ensure communication with the mentor and mentee, or regularly and frequently, to identify any issues that arise. Of course, they need to respect confidentiality. And the purpose here is, of course, to learn from the process of future mentorship arrangements. Not mentioned here, but equally important in many countries, in many situations, is if the mentorship program is being funded, by either a national or an international support agency, whoever it may be, there are often administrative, financial, and legal aspects which need to be covered. And of course, one would expect the incubator to be able to do that, to cover the legal aspects, to provide the reports to the supplier of funding. So if we go then, we've got two suggestions now, about which, of course, we can make available. The first of all is in terms of setting out the rules of engagement, a form to sign, which sets out the roles and the responsibilities of the mentor, the mentee, and the incubator, and certain aspects such as duration, meeting, etc. I mean, it's not meant to be a contract. Of course, it's not a contract. It's more of an agreement, a set of rules that can help codify that mentoring relationship. It's meant to be simple. It's meant to be quite high level, but on the other hand, set out the guiding principles. And in this case, we want it signed by the mentor, mentee, and incubator. There are many different versions of this type of form for engagement. This is the one which we've identified, which we think helps. Of course, it's available in the material, but of course there are many different types of it, and the purpose is to have something that all three parties are very happy with. They're happy to sign, and they're happy, but to look at it as they go through that mentoring relationship to see if everything is being done correctly and in line with expectations. One other way of setting out the rules and monitoring is something which is called the mentoring canvas. Actually, in the next session, we'll be talking about the business model canvas. People know this very well, but that will be the next session. Here we're talking about a mentoring canvas, and we'll show you what we mean by it. There's no single widely adopted mentoring canvas, but we do think it's something which could be useful. It's in its early stages. It's in this guide. It's included in the guidebook, and it's something which we were developing developing with the Ethiopian organisations that were part of the BIC Africa boot camp within Ethiopia in September, October. So it's something which we feel could be interesting for people to see. I'm going to show the next slide. I hope it's visible, and then we can go over what we mean by it. It's very much meant to be as a base document for organisations. People can fill as they start and then go through their mentoring process. As you can see, it's got 3 steps. Step 1 is matching. Step 2 is implementation plan, and implementing. And step 3 is monitoring. We haven't gone through these steps much, like in great detail in this sort of 1 hour subsession, but it is, but I think that those 3 steps I think are fairly clear and obvious for clear and obvious process. And the idea is that the mentor, mentee, and incubator all fill this in, or fill it in together in a session. And so that means that everyone can sign up to it afterwards. So step 1 in terms of the matching, what's the purpose of the relationship? What are the current situation capacity skills that can be offered, both from the mentor, mentee, and incubator? What is the commitment, in terms of availability and resources? This is a living document, so then that can be updated as we go through, in case people want in case people, as you go through the mentoring relationship, have different opinions. But that's step 1, and the idea here, of course, is that it's completed by the mentor, the mentee, and the incubator, and that everyone agrees to what is included. That's why having a session, for instance, to do it together is interesting. Again, then in step 2 implementation plan, the processes, activities such as is it meetings, is it other aspects, the objectives as quantifiable as possible, the milestones for those objectives, and any administrative requirements. For instance, the incubator might have some administrative requirements to make notes, or at least of the existence of a meeting when it happened, who was there, the timing, etc. That might be from the incubator's point of view. That might be a requirement. So in the implementation plan, the idea is that everyone signs up through this canvas to, well, what are the processes and activities? Is it meetings? Is it something else? Is it one-to-one? Is it group exercises? What are the objectives? And they, if possible, if they could be as quantitative as possible. And then again, sort of the dates of the mentoring, the milestones, when would the objectives be met? And indeed, how long is the mentoring relationship aimed to go on for? And then, of course, finally, repeated the administrative requirements, which are more likely to be part of the incubator model rather than the incubators, rather than the mentor and mentee. And then in terms of monitoring, it's very important as you go through this as a living document. It's meant to be available to everyone, and so the issues identified in the during the mentoring, during the performance of the mentoring, can be included here, and that it's clear, they can be discussed, and mitigation actions can be identified and implemented. So the idea here is this is a slight extension. It's an extension of rather just a form which is normally set up at the beginning of a relationship. This is set up at the beginning of a relationship, but then is used as a living document as the mentoring relationship goes ahead. So we think it might be quite an interesting way, and this is highlighted in the guide. We think both these ideas of forms and a mentor and what we're calling a mentoring canvas could be quite interesting. The way to manage repeated individual and repeated mentoring programs and mentoring relationships from the point of view of the mentor, the mentee, and the incubator. Okay, so we only have 10 minutes left. I don't see any questions in the chat. Please do ask. Please of course do ask any questions. Obviously, in addition to the ones that are already asked. So to finalise, just want to have a very few slides about communication. So it's important, and I think we're talking more from the incubator's point of view here now, rather than the mentors and the mentees relationship. So we wanted to finish off here talking about communication of mentoring program from mainly the point of view of the incubator. And there's 3 sections, well, step 1, step 2, step 3, like with the mentoring canvas, before, during, and after. So just a bit more details here of those types of targets and activities. So before the program, effectively, who are the targets? You need to select the mentees. You need to find and motivate mentors, and you need to source funding. The incubator needs to source funding to implement the mentoring program, and so there's a set of communication activities to do that, and we can go through those in a second. Also, during the program, so ensuring communication to make sure that the rules are clear, making sure that people keep their motivation, keep their engagement, and therefore achieve the required performance. Again, there's communication activities required then. And then after the program, after the mentoring program, or after the mentoring relationship, to show success of the program, it's very important that an incubator has the opportunity to show, hey, this went really well. These are the success stories. This is, and to increase the branding, increase the awareness, increase the importance in the ecosystem of the incubator. To thank people, to give their feedback. People want to be thanked. The mentors, the mentees, they want to be thanked, and the funding agencies as well. And to iterate, because normally an incubator is going to go into more and more mentoring programs, and therefore to learn, to iterate, to improve. All of this is about building trust. I think all of what we've discussed so far is about that one of the main focus is about building trust between the mentor, the mentee, and the incubator, and to the wider ecosystem as well through communication. Just so then a final 3 slides, which we like to give them, so we can finalize on time. These are very practical examples of what can be done to communicate. So this is the first of 3 slides about so program introduction and orientation, about very practically sending emails and announcements introducing the mentoring program's objectives, scheduling an orientation session to provide an overview of the program, to ensure that expectations and roles of mentors and mentees are met. It's very practical communication things that people can implement. Then a matching process, obviously, communicating the criteria between matching the mentor and the mentee, the timelines, notifying the mentors and mentees in good time about the assigned pairs, making sure that they're happy with them and making sure that, that they have personalized emails and they can be contacted with each other. Hosting a kickoff event, I mentioned this earlier. This was something which was very much focused on by our participants in the boot camp in Ethiopia. How the benefits to hosting an in-person, or preferably in-person kickoff event to formally launch the program, but also allow the mentors and mentees to meet and to create a critical mass, to create interest within the ecosystem, to make the ecosystem aware that this mentoring program is going ahead. Also, obviously, to share materials, and then check in regularly and frequently to establish that communication. Bi-weekly, monthly, depending on the specific on the specific program. Implementing workshops and webinars, again, both to communicate to the ecosystem that this program is going on, but also to promote relevant workshops, to show the themes and the objectives, to remind people, and of course you can do that through dedicated communication platforms or just through emails. And then the second part of sharing articles, videos, tools as things are going on, as the monitoring, as the mentoring program is going on, creating a repository where perhaps mentors, as they go on, can contribute to these resources. And then going to what was afterwards about feedback and evaluation, making sure mentors and mentees have, during and after, the ability to feedback and evaluate the activities. And very important, it creates motivation from the mentors and the mentees. It improves the program, it improves their further relationship, and of course the results of those can be communicated to the wider ecosystem as well, to ensure interest and understanding from them. Recognition and celebration, we had a lot of discussions about this, about how to do this, how to celebrate milestones, how to recognize the mentors and the mentees for their activities, for the impact on them. Very important. It was regarded as very important. Some very nice ideas came out about how to do that, which we're trying to identify a way of putting into the guidebook. And then peer learning and networking, so encouraging mentors to get into other networking activities. This is where the context in the ecosystem can be expanded. Sharing information in other networking events, so maybe there's other events, and maybe the mentors and mentees can go along to those, along with the incubator, to explain to explain what's going on, create interest in further programs, and then at the end of the program, obviously, to communicate any formal end, highlighting the achievements, encouraging the mentors and mentees to continue, encouraging mentees potentially to become mentors in future programs. So this very much idea of continuing and sustainability, and indeed having feedback loops. So feedback loops with all the different types of stakeholders. So keeping all the program stakeholders informed through the communication, but after the program as well, by sharing success stories, etc., etc. Ad hoc, and then we have some ideas of certain tools. Ad hoc communication, of course, can be a channel for to communicate in real time for urgent matters or quick questions. That can be a WhatsApp group or whatever type of social media one wants to use. In more formal mentoring programs, they've had a dedicated mentoring platform or collaboration tools. That I think that does have to be carefully managed and all of these very formal tools, if you're managing them centrally, they do take a lot of investment to do, but if it's quite a wide scale mentoring program, can be very interesting indeed. Sending out regular reminders in periodics, newsletters, check-ins about the events, etc., and the deadlines. Again, we keep on coming back to this idea of having regular events, be they virtual or in person, really help on mentoring programs and help improve the position of the incubator within the ecosystem. And then with program coordinators, what I mean here is the program coordinators are quite often international or national funding agencies, for instance, who of course want to be part of, if they're providing funding for a program, they want to be part of that program. They want to understand. They also want to, they want to benefit themselves. They want to make sure that their logos are communicated, but their ideas are communicated, but their image, their brand is also improved through the mentoring program. So this communication idea is obviously to ensure that the mentoring program, the mentors, the mentees, and incubators maximize the efficiency of the mentoring program, but also to show and expand and highlight the branding, all of their brandings within the ecosystem, and indeed for the program coordinator to be, for instance, if you have one, a national or international funding agency. Excellent. So I'm aware that we've just got a couple of more minutes. I don't see any questions on the chat. But what we wanted to do in this last sub-session, as I said, was to have an overview of this guidebook for implementing mentoring programs, and the more detailed information that was provided, that can be provided through the BIC Africa platform about how to implement in a very practical day-to-day sense how to implement a mentoring program. So that's me, and that's in terms of Francesco. Yeah, Francesco's showing his face as well. I think now that we've landed almost entirely on time. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left of the identified time. Maybe before you say anything, Christina and David, from me and from Francesco, if it's okay, thank you so much. We've really enjoyed it. I think the interaction, the answering of the questions in the chat, and the answering of the polls. So thank you so much. I think that's very valuable. It's very valuable to us, and I think there will be a direct link, for instance, from this last sub-session into the mentoring guidebook. To remind that there are further sessions to come, but I'm sure maybe Christina, you can remind of that. But from us, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Francesco.
Yes, that's that. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you in the next session. Maybe Christina will take care of that.
Thank you so much, Francisco and Douglas. So I would like to thank you again for delivering the great and very useful sessions today, and thanks to all the participants for being here. We hope that it was useful for you. So as we said, we will share the materials from today and the recording, and please feel free to sign up to the next sessions. The next session is on Monday, and I shared the link before. If you saw that the registration was already closed, then disregard that, please, because we extended the number of participants that can register now. So if you go back to the link, then you should be able to register. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you again in our next 3 sessions throughout December. Thank you very much. David, if there is something you would like to say, or Francisco, Douglas, please still go ahead. Otherwise, I think we can close.
Nothing from my side. Thank you again for joining us, and looking forward to see you also in the coming sessions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.